Chapter 1185. Yu Ting, who had been looking inside with anticipation, suddenly changed his expression, revealing a look of incomparable astonishment. His face was full of disbelief. "Lord Yu Ting, what's wrong?" Vesani asked doubtfully from a short distance away. Yu Ting shook his head. "It's strange, very strange." "Strange?" Vasani didn't understand what Yu Ting meant. Yu Ting pressed his right hand down. "You'll know the answer soon enough." As soon as Yu Ting finished speaking, the Colosseum shook violently. A formless shockwave surged out from within, sweeping through the minds of all the Protoss present. The mortals didn't know what was happening, but the Protoss felt it very clearly. Vasani was the first to cry out. "An elemental creature? How can there be such a powerful elemental creature? This doesn't make sense. I've been to the Nilgard Highlands, the home of the wind elemental creatures. I've also been to the Fitten Abyss, the home of the fire elemental creatures. I've also been to the Acelis Swamp, the holy land of the earth elemental creatures. But I've never seen such pure elemental power. This is the God Emperor elemental creature." A god race member who wasn't very tall couldn't help but shout out. The other gods looked at him, knowing that he wasn't joking. Perhaps this god wasn't as strong as Yu Ting, but he was a famous wandering god in the endless realm of the gods. He never stayed in one place, always wandering. His dream was to travel to every corner of the endless realm of the gods. Of course, according to his own words, this was a dream that could not be fulfilled. If he hadn't seen a god emperor elemental creature, it was impossible for the others to. "Lord Yu Ting, isn't the biggest difference between elemental creatures and us because their divinity is flawed and they can never reach the god emperor level?" Vasani asked. Yu Ting shook his head. "We can't imagine how vast the endless realm of the gods is. Even the over-gods don't dare say they know all of its secrets. It's not impossible for a god emperor elemental creature to appear. We just don't know about it. What's more, we're facing a situation that even the origin will of the divine realm is very concerned about. He's our greatest enemy in this game, as well as our ultimate test. I'm surprised that this has happened, but I think it's only natural." Ordinary players could not understand what the Protoss were saying. The Protoss used the celestial language that only the gods could understand. But everyone knew that something unimaginable must have happened inside. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on the man who was surrounded by countless hellfire. Well, to be precise, he had turned into a man. However, he was trying to figure out the Protoss words. Don't ask him why he could understand it. He didn't know either. This was probably a function that came with becoming a God Emperor level elemental creature. However, it was also possible that he had mastered too many languages in the Language Master Cup and was very good at communication. After becoming the strongest god of shady transactions, he came with the function of simultaneous translation. Of course, it was also possible that the spherical idol representing the Language Master in the Cloud City Cup itself represented the calculation of the Protoss language. As Chun Guang comfortably absorbed the fire and earth elemental energy from the hellfire in front of him, he pondered. From what they said, it seemed that elemental creatures could not reach the God Emperor level. Such a simple principle should be common knowledge in the divine realm, just like how the earth is round and the earth revolves around the sun. But it didn't work for me from the start. Am I too awesome? Or was the heavenly holy grail too awesome? Why didn't Lori look surprised at all? Could it be that this Yu Ting is too ignorant and doesn't know what's good for him? Lori's father is a god of chaos. As the legendary second generation of the gods, she knows more secrets? Forget it. That's not important anymore. What's important is that I should quickly absorb the hellfire. Chun Guang took a deep breath. All right, he couldn't breathe either. His physical body had already been burned away, leaving only his elemental core. He might as well transform into the legendary cleaning robot that had the effect of a vacuum cleaner and start absorbing the hellfire madly. The hellfire, which had been astonishingly powerful just a moment ago, had now become a soft little sheep that knelt on the ground powerlessly. The flames surrounding its body quickly dimmed, and the magma-like liquid on the surface of its body quickly solidified and turned to ash. The natural elemental counter made the Hellfire's arrogance become a dream. Perhaps, compared to ordinary elemental creatures, the Hellfire's level was not considered low. It even had special skills such as permanent sacrifice, flaming fist, and a certain degree of automatic health recovery. However, in the face of the Earth Exploder's level suppression, the combination of the fire and earth elemental energy made it unable to resist at all. The earth elemental energy was directly absorbed by Chun Guang, while the fire elemental energy was scattered and completely restored to its most basic form. The Hellfire half-knelt on the ground and felt the strength in its body rapidly being sucked out. Its joints were quickly solidifying, and it roared in despair. It was unknown whether it felt fear or not. However, it soon relaxed a little, because the other Hellfire's fist was also placed on Chun Guang's elemental ball. The Hellfire duo had appeared. Then came the trio, the 4 heavenly kings, and the 5 golden flowers. They knelt in a circle around Chun Guang. The Hellfire behind looked at its comrade in confusion, not knowing what was happening. It curiously placed its flaming fist on its comrade, kneeling in front of it. Then, it also fell into a state of stiffness, as if it was stuck to a high-voltage electric current. It was similar to how Shuju, who cultivated the Dark North divine art, would inexplicably lose control and suck in countless experts at the same time. More and more Hellfires were pushed forward by the rules of the slaughtering world. As for the second circle of Hellfires around Chun Guang, they also did not know what was going on with their comrade in front of them. Although they were powerful, they lacked intelligence. They could only rely on their instincts to move, and, at the same time, they were also restricted by the rules. Not long after, at least a few hundred Hellfires around Chun Guang joined together and knelt down. Then, more and more of them spread out like a wave. Under the shocked gazes of all the Protoss players and the confused gazes of all the ordinary players, the arrogant Hellfire knelt down in a neat row. They no longer had the power they had before. Instead, they looked like a pile of smoking rocks after a volcanic eruption. "We can't continue like this." Yu Ting suddenly changed his mind. "Everyone, attack and kill the Hellfire." Yu Ting shouted loudly. The gods didn't obstruct the ordinary players around them. Instead, they charged towards the innermost circle. It was obvious that the God Emperor-level elemental creature that Dang Wu had transformed into possessed a unique advantage in rank suppression. If he wasn't stopped, all of the Hellfire would become his nourishment. The gods gathered in the center circle from all directions and used their divine powers. The Hellfire, which had lost its ability to resist due to the Dark North divine skill of the Earthworm Exploder, couldn't withstand the attacks coming from behind. Even the delicate Weathany glowed as she jumped onto the back of the Hellfire and stomped heavily. The ordinary gamers wanted to charge in and steal the Hellfire. However, after the gods left, the scattered Hellfire that surrounded them charged at them again. The gamers had no choice but to fight. At the same time, they looked at the center circle, envious of the gods who were killing the Hellfire like they were chopping vegetables. Peasant dodged nimbly while being chased by a Hellfire. Her gaze never left the center circle. She felt that the Hellfire in front of her was moving very slowly, as though it was restricted by the rules. It looked like it was immersed in a swamp. How was Mr. Danwu doing? As a cameraman, it felt terrible not being able to see his own footage. On the other hand, Chun Guang, who was in the Hellfire, was happily enjoying his meal and thinking about how many benefits he could obtain with his innate ability. However, he saw that the Protoss had actually come to steal the kill. He was furious. When the old man was in trouble, the gods watched from the sidelines. Now that the old man was about to make a fortune, the gods came to cause trouble? Why were the gods getting more and more annoyed? Chun Guang had an idea. He temporarily stopped using the Earthworm Exploder's natural ability. Hellfire, who had already lost the ability to resist, was suddenly freed. He turned around and faced the Protoss, who was chopping melons and vegetables, and used Old Fist to serve him. Yu Ting and the other gods were caught off guard. The stronger ones dodged in time, but the weaker ones were hit by the fiery fist. They screamed in pain and flew backward, their bodies emitting flames. A woman in a white robe rushed out of the Protoss camp and used all kinds of great light, healing magic on her comrade who was on the ground. When the gods were mostly driven away, Chun Guang activated his natural ability again and continued to suck the hellfire to his heart's content. He wasn't in a hurry to recover his body. First, he was surrounded by hellfire. God knew how many eternal sacrifice effects there were around him. His body would probably be roasted the moment he came out. Second, he realized that the earthworm exploder's natural ability was best to use the elemental core and hellfire. After a while, the deities charged at him again with unwillingness in their hearts. Chun Guang used the same trick again. Unfortunately, he couldn't speak now. Otherwise, he would have scolded the gods for overestimating themselves. You guys should just watch the show properly. Don't come and make trouble for me, okay? Time flew. Half an hour had passed. At this time, in the center of the Colosseum, hundreds of hellfire were piled up. These stone golems had already turned back into round stones. They were smoking and lifeless. Even so, when the gods approached and tried to kill them, these stones would instantly turn back into stone golems. There was even a relatively weak god who couldn't retreat in time because he was too headstrong. He was surrounded by countless hellfire and killed. Of course, Yu Ting knew that Dang Wu was behind this, but he wasn't in any position to blame him. Both sides were in a delicate balance. At the beginning, when Dang Wu seemed to be in danger, the gods were also eager for him to die. When the 7th mission was over, he would be thanking the heavens if he didn't attack the gods first. Finally, with a roar, all the stone golems exploded at the same time. An endless cloud of dust rose into the sky. Then it quickly turned into ions and dissipated in the void. Dang Wu's figure gradually appeared. He floated out of the dust, wearing a rock-like armor. Chun Guang broke out in a cold sweat. He was too immersed in the pleasure of showing off. He forgot about his clothes and almost flew out. Fortunately, he realized something was wrong halfway through. He immediately used the extra earth elemental energy to form this armor. It looked a bit ugly, but it was just enough to cover his embarrassment. Yu Ting, I'm warning you. This is your last chance. If there's a next time, don't blame me for attacking first. Chun Guang looked down at Yu Ting coldly. He was extremely unhappy. This guy's white thunder armor looked better than mine. Yu Ting pretended to be confused. I don't understand what you mean. It doesn't matter if you understand it or not, as long as everyone knows it. Chun Guang snorted and floated away. Chapter 1186. After Chun Guang was done, the other scattered infernals in the Colosseum didn't last long either. In this Quest 7, although the Protoss had the advantage of the rules, they didn't really benefit from it. From the beginning, they only used the rules to force the infernals to gather towards Chun Guang. They didn't take the initiative to attack the infernals. Later, when they saw that the situation wasn't looking good, they tried to steal the kill. However, they were targeted by Chun Guang a few times. They didn't even get 2 bites of the meat, but instead, they lost another general. They tried to lure 2 monsters out, but the infernal fire in the center of the Colosseum was too concentrated. Either these stone people lost all their resistance and lay limply on the ground, or they got up to fight back, and several of them would attack at the same time. In the end, when they realized that they couldn't do anything, they turned their attention to the scattered hellfires outside. However, it was already too late. The rest of the hellfires had long since died at the hands of the ordinary players, and the remaining dozen or so were surrounded and attacked by the ordinary players in 2s and 3s. When they realized that Mr. Noon wasn't in a bad situation and had another way to suppress the infernals, the ordinary players weren't anxious anymore. They cooperated with each other to kill the monsters, and their efficiency increased to another level. The Protoss had 2 choices in front of them. They could either steal the infernals that the ordinary players were halfway through killing, or they could only watch as the last of the infernals were killed. In the end, after considering all aspects, Yu Ting decided to let the Protoss stop. The Protoss said that they didn't want to touch the infernals that were halfway through killing the ordinary players. They were the noble Protoss, and they couldn't do such a shameful thing. However, in reality, Yu Ting had other considerations. It was obvious that in this Quest 7, Noon's strength would be greatly increased. Even if it didn't change, they wouldn't be able to provoke Noon's anger. If he changed his mind and decided to settle the score with the Protoss, the losses that the Protoss would face would be immeasurable. It was obvious that as the advance party, the idea of killing the big boss, Noon, in their first mission was just an impossible dream. Therefore, the problem in front of Yuting was once again back to square one. He had to do his best to help the advance team retain more effective forces and complete the mission of the Protoss advance team. In this mysterious mission world, in this so-called game that was not just a game, they had to build a bridgehead that belonged to the Protoss race. Now, they had to restrain their behavior. In short, they had to admit defeat. As a result, in Mission 7, which clearly had the upper hand in terms of rules, the Protoss had practically come up empty-handed. Although the normal players were struggling to survive, they were more proactive and managed to steal quite a few Hellfire kills. However, Yuting's concession was indeed forgiven by Qingguang. Otherwise, Qingguang wouldn't have just left a few harsh words. Peasants stomped heavily on the neck of the dark Hades golem, who had been tortured to the point where he didn't emit any heat. The huge stone golem exploded. Congratulations to the gamers for completing Mission 7. The reward points will be automatically distributed according to the gamer's mission contribution. With the sound of the notification, the sound of winning a prize from the slot machine was heard in the reward point shop of the gamers. The gamers counted their reward points in the reward point shop and were shocked. The reward points of the Hades golem were more generous than they had imagined. It was as high as 10,000 points per kill. The shield warrior of Azeroth and the elven magical archer, who killed more than 7 Hades golems, were overjoyed. Though the other gamers had fewer kills, each of them had more than 4 Hades golems. However, when they accidentally looked at the man who had changed into a suit of yellow armor, they felt as though the men were speechless and the women were crying. Everyone had worked hard to obtain these few kills. They didn't know what Mr. Adam had done. He had nearly 1,000 Hades golems' heads in his hands. He was going to be rich. The gamers looked at Qingguang as though he was a pauper looking at a rich man. They were envious, jealous, and hateful. Qingguang gave them goosebumps. However, he didn't want to tell them that he wasn't as rich as they thought. He was actually quite pitiful. Although the total amount of reward points that I earned instantly shot up to 10 million, probably because the reward point store recognized my purchasing power, it immediately gave me a dazzling list of items to buy in the store system, but I could only look at it. I couldn't afford it. What an awakened ability. Nearly 10 million points were gone just like that. How much was he sucking? Fortunately, the Hellfire provided a lot of nutrients for my Earth-Paste Exploder ability, so I didn't need to use my reward points to buy anything, nor did I need to awaken my ability to become stronger. Otherwise, my advantage would be gone. Forget it. I couldn't let anyone find out my weakness. I had to maintain the demeanor of an expert. Looking at the gamers using their points to change their equipment, Qingguang forced himself to be calm. However, he was really envious. The old geezer's team took out the Apocalypse tank. It seemed like they had installed a light prism cannon on the tank and some sort of multidimensional combat system. The genius high school student and the electrical appliance fatty were even more overboard. God knows how they came up with an individual combat mecha. I didn't know how strong their armor was, but it looked quite scary. Rice cooker armor, water dispenser leg armor, washing machine chest plate. In short, this was a strange and magical single-soldier combat mech that made people speechless. However, with the super-strong mosquito swatter and electric mosquito killer that the household appliance fatty had previously made, no one would look down on their strange armor. God knows if their rice cooker armor had the function of an AI battle command center, if the water dispenser armor had the anti-gravity jet acceleration function, or if the washing machine chest plate had the ability to absorb energy. The warrior, sorcerer, and beast tamer's equipment was not inferior. In addition to the fireball magician, the other two were still far from the threshold of 200,000 reward points. In order to exchange for real-time combat power in the next Mission 8 and 9, they simply spent all their reward points. Only the magician was not too far away from the third awakening. There was a great possibility that he would reach 200,000 reward points after the end of Mission 8, so he simply kept it as their ultimate move. Obviously, the warrior's equipment was not strictly determined according to the division in World of Warcraft. At this time, he had already changed into a shining armor. His left hand was still holding Azeroth's rampart, but his right hand was holding a long sword that Chun Guang was very familiar with. It was the legendary Wrath of the Windseeker. As for the Beast Tamer, Misha was no longer beside him. Instead, it was replaced by a magic storm raptor that was the same size as him. Then, a longbow appeared in his hand. It was the legendary Wrath of the Stars of Solidar. As for the original Sonic Coach team, without a leader, it did not seem that there was much change. They seemed to lack someone to make decisions. They did not know if it was better to use their reward points to exchange for real-time combat power, or to save them for the Third Awakening. Because of the Sonda Coach, they could not ask Chun Guang for advice. Since they were on the opposite side of Dang Noon from the beginning, and when he killed the Sonda Coach, the Card Magician and the others could not so quickly put down their pride and take the initiative to ask for peace with Dang Noon. In addition, Dang Noon's attitude so far was not so friendly, and they did not have the confidence to continue to get help from him. No one knew what Task 8 would be like. They did not have the confidence to pass it, but they were reluctant to give up the Third Awakening that seemed not too far away. However, the death of the Sonda Coach made the alliance between their teams very fragile. No one was willing to stand up and take the initiative to sacrifice their reward points at this time, because it meant that if they got more than 100,000 reward points in the next Task 8, the Third Awakening that was originally at their fingertips would become out of reach because of a fine line. In the absence of a person with enough prestige to take the lead, no one would be willing to sacrifice for others and place their hope of survival on others being willing to do their best to protect themselves after the Third Awakening. There were basically no real weak people who could appear in this slaughtering world. Even if there were, more than half of the people had been eliminated from Task 1 to the current Task 7, and the weak people had now been reset. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps, and one is blackened by the company one keeps. The Card Magician and the others chose to follow the Sonda Coach may not be so pure. Perhaps they were also taking advantage of the Sonda Coach's enthusiasm to lead the team. On the surface, the Sonda Coach was the leader, but in fact, each had their own ulterior motives and secretly preserved their strength. Now that their leader was gone, they were unwilling to join someone else's stable team and continue to live under someone else's roof. At this time, whether it was cooperation or mutual trust, they had reached a very stable state. It would be difficult for others to integrate, and they might even be used as cannon fodder. No one was a fool, and no one was willing to be cannon fodder. So even if the remaining people in the Sonda Coach's team were suspicious of each other, they still chose to maintain their small team in such an awkward way. At this time, Chun Guang was afraid that others would ask him how he planned to spend the reward points, so he deliberately pretended to be unapproachable. After the end of Task 7, he sat cross-legged in the corner without saying a word and pretended to be deep in thought. Of course, his mind was not idle. Until now, he was still constantly trying to figure out the true meaning of this killing task. As the progress of the task progressed little by little, Chun Guang also gradually understood the true meaning of the killing task from the beginning to a touch of darkness. It was obvious that this wasn't an independent existence of the world in a cup. This was probably the beginning of a change. Though he wasn't sure what was happening, it was likely that his world in a cup would change from a single-player game to a legendary large-scale online RPG game. Chun Guang speculated that it was likely to be related to the merging of the real world and the real world. Perhaps during the merging process, an unexpected tunnel was opened between the heavenly world and the 3,000 worlds in the heavenly Holy Grail. That was why Yu Ting and the other Celestials were projected into his world in a cup. At the same time, a tunnel also appeared between the real world and the world in a cup, causing Peasant and the other mortals to be dragged into the world in a cup. It was precisely because of the emergence of these Protoss and human players that the world in a cup changed its original characteristics. From a rather random quest that only targeted itself, It began to evolve into a complete large-scale game system that was richer in layers and frameworks. In this game system, the merchant shop system was very important. The reward points are the various benefits that the gamers obtained from killing monsters or completing missions. They represented the core elements of the evolution of the gamer's abilities. In addition, the existence of the quest system was to give players the simplest hint so that they wouldn't be confused and wouldn't know what situation they were facing. The illustrated handbook was to provide further hints to the gamers during the mission process. It was also to help the new gamers understand the game. The ability enhancement in the merchant shop system, which was the awaken ability, was similar to the skill tree in normal online games. Perhaps because this was the first time the world and the cup developed a large-scale online game function, the awaken ability was set up in a myriad of strange ways. It was very discordant and unsystematic. It wasn't like the traditional online games, where the professions such as warrior, mage, priest, sacred knight, bandit, and warlock had a clear division of labor. Perhaps it was based on the characteristics of the gamers in the real world, and the awakened ability was specifically developed and enhanced. The randomly set ability enhancement made it difficult to quantify the skill tree of the gamers. For example, Peasant's Hourglass of Time was like a BUG, but it wasn't very effective in actual combat. The electrical appliance Fat Man's strange ability to summon electrical appliances was very practical, and he had the upper hand in the early stages. The gamers who could tank the sniper rifle were even more ridiculous. It was unreasonable to summon the Apocalypse tank, but it was useless against the Hellfire tank. Such a game developer would definitely be ridiculed to death by players in real life if it was a game developer like this. As for the skill tree of the Celestial gamers, Chen Guang wasn't able to find any clues. Perhaps it had something to do with the abilities of the Celestials in the Boundless Realm. For example, Yuting must be thinking of a way to develop his power of thunder. Due to the high starting point of the Protoss race, it was much more difficult for them to awaken their abilities than ordinary players. However, once they accumulated enough reward points and pressed the button to strengthen their abilities, the effect would be terrifying. Besides, the distribution of rewards for killing monsters wasn't much different from normal online games. The rewards would be calculated based on the last slash, and 70% of the players would receive the last slash. Otherwise, the rewards would be distributed based on the contribution points of a single mission. It wasn't difficult to understand. Why was his awakened ability so ridiculous? Why did the celestial power of the Celestials burst out of his anus after the empowerment? What role did he have to play in this game mission? Also, why did the Celestials say that this game was related to the survival of the entire heavenly world? Why were they so hostile toward him from the start? What was his main plot mission? Was his true faction the Celestials or the human faction? If he led the human faction to obtain more contribution points, would it mean the victory of the human faction? What benefits would there be? If the Celestials obtained more contribution points, what benefits would it bring to the Celestials? What harm would it bring to himself? Until now, Chen Guang was clueless about these questions. He was only sure that he couldn't lose. He had to think of a way to survive. Chapter 1187. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, a sudden change occurred in the colossal Colosseum. An inexplicable white fog appeared out of thin air beneath everyone's feet. Before anyone could even scream, their entire bodies were shrouded in the thick fog. Chen Guang was puzzled. It seemed like Mission 8 was coming. Why wasn't there any notification? Wasn't the fog a little too strong? Even I can't see a thing. He tried to concentrate his inner strength in his eyes. When he stared, he couldn't see more than a meter. Not only that, but when he spread out his mental power, it was also blocked by the fog. Normally, his mental power could cover a maximum of several hundred meters. Wherever his mind went, it was as if he could see it with his naked eye, or even more vividly than the naked eye. But at this time, in this thick fog, he could not even reach a distance of 5 meters. Furthermore, he could not see as clearly as before. It was as if he was in the clouds and fog, as if he was looking at a small piece of film with a super thick mosaic. Lord Yuting, I can't see anything. Lower your voice, I know. Chen Guang pricked up his ears and heard the conversation from the distant celestial race. He understood that he couldn't see, and the celestial race wasn't any better. He heaved a sigh of relief, but he became nervous again. If the celestial race was finished, it wouldn't be a good thing for him. "Mr. Dang, are you there?" Peasant's voice came from beside him. She must have found her way here based on her memory. Guang nodded. He remembered that she couldn't see his movements, so he replied, "Yes. What's the matter? I'd like to ask you a question." Peasant sounded hesitant. Guang said, "Just ask. Don't beat around the bush. I won't hide what I can tell you. It's useless to ask me what I don't know." There are only 2 small missions left before the massacre mission ends. I'd like to know if gamers like us can return to the outside world after the missions end. Will we come back in the future? Like you, a veteran gamer? In addition, can the abilities we obtain in the game still be used in the real world? Also, even if he couldn't use it in real life, these abilities should still exist when he returned to the game, right? Just like you, Mr. Adam. Peasant took 2 steps towards Guang. When they could see each other's faces clearly, she asked a bunch of questions. Guang asked her about it. These questions were very important, but he was unable to answer them. He was just pretending to be an old player. What the hell did he know? However, he couldn't ignore Peasant's question. Since he had bragged, he had to answer for it. He was shameless. "Based on my experience, you can leave this place unscathed after completing the mission. In the outside world, you can retain your memories, but as for your abilities, it's very complicated. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Right now, I can't give you an accurate answer because everyone's situation is different. If you come back next time, you should be able to inherit the ability." It seemed like Guang's answers were clear and logical, but he didn't say anything. If Sherlock was wrong and didn't remember what happened, then Peasant wouldn't remember Sherlock's nonsense. If Peasant retained his memories, then he would be right. As for the ability, Sherlock didn't give an accurate answer. Even if it was about inheriting abilities, Sherlock didn't give an accurate answer. Instead, he hid a trap in his words. It was possible that he didn't have the ability. There's nothing I can do about it. This old man always does things in a watertight manner. Is that so? I understand. Thank you, Mr. Adam. Guang laughed and said, "Don't mention it." "Peasant, what's your job in the real world?" Peasant turned his head slightly. He didn't know why Sherlock was asking such a question. However, Guang changed his words. He realized that if he asked someone else, what if that person answered and asked him the same question instead? With his identity, he would be recognized immediately. However, he didn't want to lie. "Forget it. Don't say it. It's not important." "Oh." Peasant turned his head and became alert. If Sherlock hadn't changed his tone, he would have blurted it out. He didn't know why he had an unnecessary trust in Sherlock. When he stood beside Sherlock, he would let his guard down. He always felt that this Mr. looked very similar to a certain person outside. Unfortunately, everyone had changed their appearances when they came in, and no one knew what the other's real appearance looked like. They were also on guard against each other, so it was not good for them to take the initiative to ask. It was rare for Sherlock to ask. If she told the truth, with Sherlock's personality, he would tell the truth too. She had missed the opportunity. Peasant was worried. She blinked and remembered the camera in her eyelashes. She stuck out her tongue. It was better if they didn't know each other's identities. Would she be harming him? What should I do if I end up becoming enemies with him because of this? Wouldn't she be creating trouble for Sherlock? Sherlock looked powerful. Though Sherlock was also powerful, Sherlock didn't seem to be much weaker. While Peasant was lost in his thoughts, the fog in the sky became thicker. In the blink of an eye, everyone couldn't see anything. Even though they were close by, all they could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. At the same time, the electronic notification sounded in everyone's mind. Mission 8. Collect the target objects in the Chaos Labyrinth. Collect 10 target objects to complete the mission. As soon as the voice finished speaking, everyone felt as if the world was spinning around them. Guang was shocked. Did this mean that there was a world within a world in the massacre world? Was he trying to transfer everyone to another labyrinth? After spinning like this for about 3 to 4 minutes, everyone's bodies gradually stabilized. The fog quickly dissipated, and what appeared in front of them was a milky white wall. The wall rose from the ground and reached the sky. Looking up from below, it was at least tens of meters high. Everyone was teleported. Chen Guang was standing in the middle of a long and narrow tunnel. Peasant, who was supposed to be by his side, was nowhere to be found. The passageway was about 8 meters wide. Looking ahead, it took a turn after about 50 meters. Chen Guang stomped his feet, and the stomping sounds traveled far in the spacious tunnel before reverberating back. It felt as though there was no sound at all. He walked to the bottom of the wall and touched it. The wall felt cold, but it was very smooth. It felt like plaster. Chen Guang clenched his fists and channeled his inner strength before punching the wall heavily. After a loud bang, the wall was still as smooth as a mirror, and it didn't suffer any damage. A new illustration card even popped up in Chen Guang's mind. Chaos Labyrinth Wall. Characteristics: indestructible. Fine, you win. You set it to be indestructible. You're good. But do you think that's a problem for me? The walls weren't of much use to Chen Guang, who could fly. He immediately stepped on the walls and climbed up. Only a fool would walk the labyrinth. Labyrinths were the most annoying. Boom! Chen Guang slammed into the invisible wall at the top of the high wall and fell to the ground. It was another new illustration card. Chaos Labyrinth, Invisible Smallpox. Characteristics: indestructible. This was clearly targeting him. Chen Guang was furious, but there was nothing he could do. Forget it. Although he hated maze-like games since he was young, he had no choice but to accept his fate since the game had been forcefully set in this way. Calming himself down, Chen Guang raised his leg and walked forward. But before he could take 2 steps, he suddenly heard a cracking sound beneath his feet, as if he had triggered a mechanism. The wall beside him rumbled, and a crack appeared on the wall. Chen Guang was alarmed. He turned and got into a fighting stance. The crack extended to the other side of the labyrinth wall, where a bewildered peasant stood. "Mr. Dang, why are you here?" Peasant was overjoyed, and he ran through the crack towards Chen Guang. As he ran, he said, "My labyrinth is too much. The front, back, left, and right are all blocked. If the walls didn't crack, I wouldn't know what to do." Chen Guang looked down at his feet. It couldn't be such a coincidence. I stepped on a mechanism when I lifted my leg, and the mechanism released you? We changed positions, but you're still so close to me? I find it unbelievable. Chen Guang didn't reply to Peasant. Instead, he looked warily at her. At that moment, he heard the sound of splashing water behind him. Peasant shouted as he ran, "Be careful, Mr. Dang." When Chen Guang turned around, he saw a humanoid blob of liquid behind him that was changing its shape. About 3 seconds later, an exact replica of himself appeared in front of him. It wasn't his appearance in the outside world. It was his current bald and strong appearance. What kind of trick is this? Chen Guang lifted his hand to look at the illustration card. Monster card. Clone, the ultimate skill of a mutated elf. After reading the skill, Chen Guang didn't have time to think. He instinctively jumped to the side. However, an orange-yellow stream of light shot out from the clone's back. It even followed Chen Guang's movements and turned to hit him. Gosh, he knew it would be like this. The directional skill couldn't be dodged. Chen Guang was hit by the orange-yellow ray of light, and his movements became sluggish. He felt his body become lighter, which was probably due to the intangible state. It was the special effect of the Phantom Blade, the must-have equipment for the mutated elf. There had to be a follow-up. While he was thinking, a ball of water shot out from behind the orange-yellow ray. The ball of water hit Chen Guang's head, causing him to see stars and be unable to move. It was a familiar feeling. It was the legendary Phantom Blade's attack. Was he going to lose his HP? No, he wasn't injured. He couldn't move. Chen Guang realized that the mutated elf didn't use the agility form to deal damage. Instead, it used the strength form to stun and control him. Peasant was in danger. He couldn't move his head, but his eyes turned slightly. He saw his bald clone brush past him and pounce on his back. Peasant's exclamation came from behind him. What's going on? Chapter 1188. Peasant was astonished by the 2 identical midday situations. Furthermore, the clone's movements weren't any different from the real Chen Guang. When he charged over, she couldn't evade it all. Seeing Chun Guang standing stiffly in his spot, Peasant gritted his teeth and thought quickly. He took out the time hourglass and cast time deceleration on the clone. Though the clone had the same physical strength as Chun Guang, she wasn't as resistant to time as Chun Guang. But just as the clone was controlled, the sound of a waterfall came from a place a little further away. Chun Guang saw the true form of the transformed elf. It was a 2-meter tall, crystal-clear body made of flowing water. It had no eyebrows, eyes, and nose. Only its head and arms could be seen. It also had a single leg that resembled a whirlpool. When Chun Guang saw it, it reared back and swung its head, transforming into a whirlpool as it charged forward. Although it took a long time, it only took 2 seconds. After decelerating the clone's movements, Peasant dodged the clone's heavy punch. She could only watch as the transformed elf transformed into a wave that charged at Chun Guang and engulfed Chun Guang. That wasn't the end, as the wave continued to charge at her. As the wave came closer, Peasant couldn't avoid it. At this critical moment, an earth wall inexplicably appeared in front of her, fiercely blocking the attack of the transformed elf. Chun Guang wiped the perspiration off his head and muttered to himself, "Fortunately, mud counters water. Otherwise, I'd be in danger." He was covered in cold sweat. He was caught off guard by the transformed elf's attack. He didn't have time to suspect whether the peasant behind him was real or fake. When he was controlled, he thought she was dead. The maximum control time of the power transformation attack was 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough for Peasant to die 7 or 8 times. Fortunately, she was the real Peasant. She used time to delay the clone. The time that Chun Guang was controlled was not as long as 4 seconds due to the restraining effect of the earth element on the water element. He regained his freedom in about 2.5 seconds. The moment he regained his freedom, it was also the moment when the transformed elf's wave attack came right at him. There was no way to dodge, so he took it head-on. The violent impact of the water scraped his skin, almost scraping his flesh off. But at this time, the superiority of the earth elemental over the water elemental showed itself again. Though he was disfigured, he recovered quickly and didn't suffer any serious injuries. When he regained his senses, he was able to summon a mud wall to protect Peasant. As soon as Chun Guang finished speaking, the clone was freed. Peasant's time manipulation had expired. The clone's target was Peasant. Though Peasant managed to escape, he had to face the danger of being surrounded by wolves and tigers. Her time hourglass was on cooldown, so she could only count on Chun Guang. Chun Guang didn't disappoint her. He turned around and fought with the clone. As for the real body of the transformed elf, it was like the game. It looked powerful, but it was only capable of long-range attacks. His body, which was made of water, punched in the air. Every time he punched, a small ball of water shot towards Peasant like a shot put. However, the ball of water was blocked by the soil that appeared in the path of the ball of water. Chun Guang fought with the clone while he had to create soil to protect Peasant. Fortunately, he had rich experience in dealing with himself during the mirror image mission. He seemed to be having a hard time, but he was still able to control the situation. The clone had copied the characteristics of the transformed elf in the game. Its health points were the same as Chun Guang's, but its attack power was only half of Chun Guang's. The health points didn't refer to the health points above the clone's head. It referred to the resistance of the clone. For example, when a gamer was fighting with another gamer and was hit on the temple, he would receive a critical hit, and his health bar would be emptied. If the gamer was hit in the stomach, he would be able to withstand 5 to 8 punches before collapsing. At this moment, Chun Guang was facing the clone in such a manner. However, only Chun Guang knew how resilient he was. Fortunately, the clone didn't have the regenerative ability of the earth-paced exploder. The power of its punches was reduced by half, so it couldn't cause any substantial damage to Chun Guang. As long as the clone prevented the clone from damaging Peasant, it wouldn't be a problem. After about 20 seconds, the transformed elf skills were on cooldown. Then, it attacked Chun Guang with a series of ethereal and transformed elf attacks. This time, Chun Guang was prepared. He prepared a perimeter wall for Peasant and instructed him to prepare the time hourglass. After Chen Guang was immobilized, the clone threw Chen Guang at peasant and was hit by the time-slowing effect of the time hourglass. The transformed elf used the same method to create waves. However, he crashed into the wall. A magical beast was a magical beast. It didn't have the intelligence of a human. Once the magical beast's weakness and movement pattern were grasped, it was as easy as walking a dog. 2 minutes later, Chen Guang finally shattered his mirror image with a punch. But before he could feel proud of himself, another silhouette formed from water appeared beside him. The unlucky transformed elf summoned another mirror image clone. "Mister, I can't go on like this. My reward points are running out." Chen Guang could afford it, but every time he was immobilized, Peasant had to expend his reward points to activate the time hourglass. She already owed a huge amount of debt, and she still didn't know how to repay it. She had saved up a little with great difficulty, but now she had almost used up all of it. She thought she could see the light after a while. She didn't expect another mirror image clone to appear. She couldn't take it anymore. "Let me think of another way." Chen Guang wiped the perspiration off his forehead. He didn't expect the first creature in a labyrinth of chaos to be so difficult to deal with. He continued to stall the clone as he racked his brains. Previously, he had tried to use the innate ability of the Marmalade Exploder to see if he could directly absorb the water elemental energy in the clone, but he failed. The clone was a mirror image ability, so the elemental energy was unstable. He had to rely on the transformed elf's ability to twist the elemental energy together. When he tried to absorb it, the elemental energy would collapse and retreat. The elemental energy moved from one side of the clone to the other, but he couldn't absorb it. He could only pin his hopes on the reward point shop. Forget it, he didn't have any reward points. He couldn't even afford a box of matches. Chen Guang looked at Peasant. How could he forget about her? "Peasant, search in your merchant shop for items that can reduce mana. These are elemental creatures. Like the Hades, the mana reduction effect has a mystical bonus." 10 seconds later, Peasant was overjoyed. "There's a Zwaman Berserker glove that costs 2,000 reward points. The description says Magic Breaker. Buy it and let me try it on." 5 seconds later, Chen Guang took the wooden and metal glove that Peasant threw at him. It looked like 2 human heads. He wore it and read the description. He was amused. An exquisite piece of equipment from the Grand Devil Temple, Zwaman. Only berserkers who hate mana can wear it. It was imbued with Magic Breaker ability by the Grand Devil Shaman. It is the natural enemy of all magicians. Was this item exquisite? I could get a 3-year-old kid to do it by hand and make it look better than this. Forget it. Let's test the effects first. Chen Guang retracted his disdain and threw a punch at the clone before him. Unlike before, the moment his fist came into contact with the clone, a dazzling light blue light burst out from the point of contact between the two. Chen Guang retracted his fist and saw a fist-sized mark on the chest of the replica. Though the mark was dissipating rapidly, the breath of the replica was much weaker. It was effective, but it wasn't enough. Dealing with the replica wasn't enough to injure the body of the elf. Since the elf had the Phantom Blade, who knew if it had any mana regeneration equipment? Are there any long-range mana reduction items? Peasants searched again. There are, but the effects are poor. What's that? Trainee darts, Athlete Wilkins, magical practice darts. What a long name. What special effects does it have? Only one. It can be automatically retrieved after being shot. Isn't that good? As it's a practice darts, there's no needle. The dart head is a magnet. Don't worry, give it to me. It doesn't matter if there's a needle or not. Chen Guang said loudly. His hands were itching. He hadn't used his darts for a long time. His skills hadn't deteriorated, right? 3 seconds later, Chen Guang flicked his left hand and threw the dart. The headless dart drew an arc in the air and headed for the head of the elf, who was a few meters away. It coincidentally interrupted the elf's wave-like form. The elf raised its hand and was about to charge forward in the wave-like form. After the dart hit its head tilted backward. It didn't move, and it froze momentarily. The elf wasn't able to charge forward, so Chun Guang swung his boxing glove to restrain the mirror image. Peasant didn't need to awaken his ability to overcome the difficulty. After a few seconds, the shape-shifting elf executed his combo attack and successfully immobilized Chun Guang. The clone abandoned Chun Guang and chased after Peasant. This couldn't go on. When a morphing sprite skill came off cooldown, Chun Guang suddenly had the idea of shooting the dart at the lump of morphing sprite, and it actually worked. He was only affected by the speed reduction and ethereal effects of the Phantom Blade, but he wasn't stunned. As long as he wasn't stunned, the clone wouldn't be able to shake him off, and Peasant wouldn't have to expend his points. After a full 10 minutes, finally, accompanied by a clattering sound, the clone and the original spirit body collapsed together. The first magical beast that charged out of the labyrinth of chaos was dead. Both of them looked at each other and heaved a sigh of relief. They didn't expect the mission system to announce the rewards. The reward for a magical beast was as high as 50,000 points. Chun Guang had the majority, but Peasant had at least 40%. The reason was that Chun Guang used 2 types of firepower provided by Peasant. When distributing the reward points, it was calculated as her contribution points. If it were anyone else, they would be unhappy. However, Chun Guang didn't have such thoughts. He didn't know where his reward points would go. If Peasant held onto the reward points, she would be able to purchase items from the merchant shop. With their cooperation, Sherlock didn't have to worry about Peasant rejecting his request. Her reward points were earned by Sherlock, so it wasn't a problem for Peasant to purchase items for him. Good, let's go. Who knows what the 10 targets are? Chun Guang waved his hand and gestured for Peasant to follow him. Chun Guang wasn't bothered by it. Although it was strange for her to come to his side right from the start, he wasn't bothered by it. She wasn't a threat to his safety. Wait, Mr. Dang, I discovered something. Peasant started rummaging on the ground. Chun Guang urged him, stop rummaging. The ground is bare. Can't you see it clearly? No, Mr. Dang. What do you think this is? Could it be the target that the mission requires us to collect? Peasant rubbed his fingers as he stood in front of Chun Guang. Chun Guang squinted his eyes and stared intently at the space between Peasant's fingers. After a long while, he asked, Are you fooling me? He felt that he wasn't blind. Peasant didn't have anything in his hands. Peasant looked at him blankly, as though she didn't understand what he meant. After a while, she came to her senses nervously. Mr. Dang, you can't see what I'm holding? Chun Guang was angry. What are you talking about? Peasant raised his right hand as though he was holding something and extended it towards Chun Guang. A transparent miniature dart. It's a dart, but it's different from the practice dart that I bought. Chun Guang narrowed his eyes. He waved his hand in front of Peasant's fingers, but he couldn't see or touch anything. He didn't believe it and inserted his finger between Peasant's fingers, but it passed through without touching anything. Peasant bent down to pick up the dart in a panic. It was as though he had dropped something. Chun Guang felt his hair stand on end. Did he see a ghost? He was bewildered. Well, what's going on? He didn't understand why there was something that he couldn't see or touch, but others could. I received a notification. This is one of the items we need to collect. It's a strange name, Dart Idol. Wait, Dart Idol? What do you think it looks like? Chun Guang asked hurriedly. Peasant observed it for a while and said, It's a dart that we often see on television. It's made of crystal, and it's translucent like a work of art. I see. Chun Guang understood. This dart was a one-on-one drop, and no one could snatch it. I killed the monster, so why did Peasant drop it? That wasn't fair. Is this a directional drop? Why did it drop mine? Peasant understood as well. That should be the case. Forget it, let's go. It's probably random. Chun Guang looked carefree as he waved his hand nonchalantly and walked forward. The labyrinth of chaos was within the boundaries of the Roman Colosseum. They walked forward and turned a corner. They could vaguely hear the cheers of the spectators. After a while, Peasant triggered the mechanism. A 3-meter-tall tin woodman appeared in front of them. To be precise, it wasn't a tin woodman. It was an empty armor shell. Though there was no one inside, the armor was strong. It had great strength and defense, and it was fast. Chun Guang had a tough battle with the Tin Woodman. The only benefit was that he only obtained the Tin Woodman, so he didn't have to protect Peasant. I'm really seeing a ghost. Why did you drop your item while you were a bystander? Chen Guang was infuriated when he heard peasants say that she had stumbled upon an alto mini-sculpture. He finally understood that the so-called 10 main targets were actually miniature versions of his 10 statues. However, he couldn't understand it no matter what. He was the one who killed the monsters, and the statue was his to begin with, so why didn't it drop for him? Stand further away next time. Oh, okay. The third time, when Qin Guang spent a lot of effort to shatter a floating knife, peasant ran over from 50 meters away and picked up a pencil crystal sculpture that she was talking about. Qin Guang broke down. Forget it. He didn't know how strong the magical beasts in the Chaos Labyrinth were. Since he encountered peasant, he couldn't possibly chase her away. Perhaps the setting of this unlucky Chaos Labyrinth was that if two people formed a team, whoever obtained the first object would have to collect all the objects first before the other team could start collecting. That must be the case. Don't panic, I still have hope. Qin Guang consoled himself. On the other side, the gamers who were scattered throughout the Chaos Labyrinth were in different situations. Some people accidentally stepped on an ant on the ground while walking, and with a buzz sound, a miniature sculpture would jump out and land under their feet, causing the soles of their feet to hurt. A gamer fought a magical beast for 800 rounds before defeating it with a single blow. There were also gamers who encountered powerful magical beasts. They couldn't defeat the magical beasts, so they had to escape. They were chased to the ends of the earth. In the process of fighting and escaping, some gamers unleashed their potential and came up with various tricks to kill the magical beasts. There were also gamers who were careless and perished on the spot. Besides the magical beasts, there were various hidden weapons in the Chaos Labyrinth that could deal a fatal blow to the gamers. Compared to the mortals and Protoss who had died in battle, Chen Guang, who had killed 3 monsters in a row without any results, didn't seem that unlucky. Peasant, who had been following Chen Guang with a heavy heart, was hesitating. She guessed why she was by Tang Wu's side. The mastermind who gave her the side mission must be behind it. His motive was for her to secretly take pictures of him. She wasn't against it. She hadn't returned the reward points she owed, but she knew that even if she returned them, the matter wouldn't be resolved. She felt that she was too much. She didn't just lie down and receive the reward points, but she also obtained all the items. If she was Tang Wu, she would have gone berserk. Tang Wu, I'm not angry at all. I'm calm, very calm. Chapter 1189. After dealing with 8 heavy armor, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Inferno Hound, Vicious Vines, and other strange magical beasts, all 8 of which were peasant statues, Chen Guang finally broke down. He thought that since he was the savior and had 10 statues, he didn't have to collect them. Suddenly, the same notification sounded in the minds of all the gamers. Congratulations to you, Ting, for collecting 10 target items. You will receive generous rewards and be sent out of the labyrinth of chaos. This was only the first sentence, so it wasn't a huge blow. Yu Ting wasn't weak. If he was lucky, it wouldn't be surprising if he collected 10 targets before Chen Guang. But then, the electronic voice added a few more sentences, which was a little sad. Currently, reporting the deaths of the gamers. Gao Yang, Hu Huan, Akasa's tribe god, Lake Bernard demon, and other gamers have been killed in battle and have been reset. The gamers were dumbfounded. They hadn't heard any death notifications in the labyrinth of chaos. They thought it was a happy ending, but they didn't expect the labyrinth to delay the notifications and report them in a centralized manner. Immediately, the survivors felt extremely sad, but they also felt their hair stand on end. There were mortals and celestials among the dead gamers. This meant that in the labyrinth of chaos, everyone had the possibility of dying. But this wasn't the biggest blow to Chen Guang. Then, the electronic notification started to count the mission completion of the other gamers. After Yu Ting, who had collected 10 targets, was Peasant, who had collected 8 targets. Then it was Withany and the others who had collected 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Finally, the damned labyrinth singled out Chen Guang. Special note: up until now, only the veteran player Noon has yet to collect a single target. If he isn't able to collect the target before the deadline, he will be killed and reset. Chen Guang stared with his eyes wide open. He thought he had heard wrongly. What a joke. The old man was the owner of the heavenly Holy Grail. Why did he have to reset him? In the words of an official, who gave you the right? However, his arrogance did not last long, as he immediately broke out in a cold sweat. According to the nature of the heavenly Holy Grail, perhaps this was the original setting of the realm within the cup. So, there's really a possibility that he would die. Mr. Dang, why don't I go? Let's split up. Peasant said nervously. She felt that she was a hindrance to Mr. Dunn. If he was alone, he wouldn't need to protect himself, and the efficiency of dealing with the phantom beasts would be much higher. He would also be able to obtain the target. She was too much of a hindrance. When she suggested splitting up, an alarm went off in Peasant's mind, reminding her that she had to complete her side mission. But even so, she really did not have the face to stay with Dang Niu any longer. Chen Guang rejected her request. There were two reasons. Compared to other awakened abilities, though Peasant's time control was incredible, it was too weak for direct combat. First, she had to consume reward points to use the hourglass. Though she had obtained tens of thousands of reward points, it was not enough for her expenses. Even if she could use her ability to slow down the phantom beast time, if she couldn't break the defense of the phantom beasts, what was the use? The strength of the phantom beast that she encountered was not something she could defend against. Chen Guang wasn't sure why the others were able to obtain the crystal sculpture of his statue so easily, and he wasn't willing to think about it. He knew that he might have been tricked. He was dealing with powerful phantom beasts, while the others were dealing with weak ones. With the characteristics that the slaughter world had displayed so far, this was completely possible. Chen Guang couldn't let Peasant leave just like that. The mythical beasts that he had encountered were difficult to deal with. Chen Guang didn't want to gamble on whether Peasant would encounter an easier mythical beast after leaving him. More than 5 gamers had perished in a labyrinth of chaos. It's not necessary. Continue to follow me. I don't believe that you won't be able to kill me after you collect the required items. Chen Guang gritted his teeth and said. His stubbornness was at its peak. He decided to fight the labyrinth of chaos. Okay, sorry to trouble you. Peasant was in a dilemma. When she was traveling with Chen Guang, the phantom beasts that they encountered were too difficult to deal with. If she was alone, she would have died at the hands of the first mutated elf. When she had the thought of leaving Dang Niu, the alarm in her head was deafening. It made her hallucinate. Though she didn't receive a clear hint, she felt that even if she collected all 10 required items, she would be killed if she refused to carry out the side mission. It seemed like a simple suggestion, but deep in her heart, she was determined to die. Chen Guang rejected her request, allowing her heart to calm down. However, at the same time, she felt ashamed. Although Chen Guang was a smart person, he could tell that Su Tao was conflicted in her heart. However, he never expected that there would be a deeper meaning hidden in her eyes. Thus, he consoled. You don't have to be too bothered about it. Although those illusory beasts are powerful, they're still not my opponent. It's just a matter of time. It's a good thing that you can complete the mission and leave this labyrinth as soon as possible. Okay, it's like this. Thank you, Dang Niu. Peasant replied with a heavy heart. She wasn't sure. She felt that even if she collected all the required items, she wouldn't be able to leave. The two of them walked for a while. In this chaos labyrinth, no matter how far they walked, they could only see endless turns and turns. Not only that, but what he saw would always be the same tall white wall. The color would never change, making it seem lonely and boring. Unless he could encounter a magical beast, but that would be a different feeling. It would be better to be boring. They didn't know what was going on, but they didn't find anything after walking for a long time. Instead, there was a new electronic notification that more and more gamers had completed their mission. If not, Peasant had a new excuse to split up. Chen Guang gestured for her to keep quiet. Chen Guang looked ahead warily. What's wrong? Peasant noticed Chen Guang's solemn expression and became nervous. Chen Guang narrowed his eyes and said, It's a long story. Stand here and don't move. Be careful. As he spoke, he tried to walk forward. His steps were light and slow. Indeed, Chen Guang didn't see anything, but his senses were sharp. Just a moment ago, he suddenly felt an obscure energy fluctuation coming from the front. The feeling was fleeting. If it were someone else, they would have ignored it or thought it was a nervous reaction. However, Chen Guang was very alert. He wasn't nervous at all, so he was sure that there was something in front of him. As expected, as he got closer, the feeling of emptiness in front of him grew stronger. However, he increasingly felt that there was something hidden in front of him. He was highly focused. As he touched, he suddenly jumped back. In the next moment, two figures appeared out of thin air. At the same time, a water-like trace streaked past his nose. When Chen Guang came to a stop, he finally got a clear look at the two humanoid figures. Two figures, one black and one white, floated in the air. Their long robes hung down from their shoulders, but they didn't touch the ground. The two figures didn't have legs, and there was nothing under their robes. Apart from that, they were also wearing two pointy hats, but there was no face under the hats. Instead, there were two human heads protruding from the collars of their robes, and there was nothing inside the black hole. It was amazing that they were black and white impermanents. But which black and white impermanents would carry a sickle? What had just slashed across the tip of his nose were the two black and white sides that were gradually taking shape. Their combination of Chinese and Western was tarnishing Huaxia's traditional culture. Wait, most of the settings of the world in a cup were based on my own thoughts. Is that how I view the black and white impermanents? AI, it's scary to be uncultured. I have to spend more time reading and consolidate the traditional culture in my mind. Fortunately, nobody knows that it came from my mind. Otherwise, it'll be embarrassing. Why are the black and white impermanents carrying sickles? Isn't that the equipment of the Grim Reaper in Western mythology? Shouldn't the black and white impermanents carry a soul, attracting banner? Fortunately, Peasant was knowledgeable, and he saw through the uneasiness of the situation. Chen Guang said righteously, "The massacre mission settings are sometimes stupid. Don't mind the details." As he turned to speak to Peasant, the black and white impermanents waved their death sickles. Though the magical beasts weren't as intelligent as humans, their combat skills were innate. When they saw Chen Guang distracted, they attacked immediately. Facing the two large sickles, Chen Guang twisted his body at a strange angle and dodged between the two sickles. He instinctively used the unique skill he learned in the realm of true martial. It was called Breeze Brushing Willow. It was suitable for dodging large sharp weapons in a chaotic battle. When he used Breeze Brushing Willow, his body would become as light as a willow catkin. He would float with the slightest breeze, and the sickles wouldn't be able to hit him. The black and white impermanents weren't weak. After their first strike failed, they waved their sickles again. There wasn't even a slight breeze, and the sickles became faster. Chen Guang had to dodge, but his posture wasn't as elegant. At the same time, he observed the intricacies of the black and white impermanents' moves. When the black and white impermanents waved their sickles for the third time, their sickles trembled violently. An unknown force drew out a black hole in front of the sickles, and they didn't cause any disturbances in the airflow. The speed of their evolution was so fast that it made one's hair stand on end. Chen Guang gritted his teeth and retaliated. He punched the black and white impermanents twice. After sending the black and white impermanents flying, the black and white impermanents charged back. Chen Guang punched again, but before his fist could touch the black and white impermanents, a ripple-like hole appeared on the black and white impermanents' bodies. Chen Guang's fist hit empty air, and he had to raise his hands to withstand the two death scythes. The black and white impermanents are evolving. Peasant shouted in surprise from afar. Chen Guang was speechless as he said, "You don't have to tell me that. I'm not blind." He was puzzled. Compared to the magical beasts, the black and white impermanents were much stronger, and each of their moves was evolving. After fighting for a while, he was furious that the magical beasts kept finding trouble with the easily bullied peasant. The black and white impermanents were stubborn and only focused on him. After fighting for more than an hour, Chen Guang wasn't able to kill the black and white impermanents. Instead, the black and white impermanents became stronger. During this period of time, the other players either died in battle or completed the collection, but no one told them how long the deadline for the quest was. The gamers thought that the lack of notification meant that the mission wasn't coming, but Chen Guang understood the characteristics of the world in a cup. The lack of notification meant that the mission could come at any time. Forget it. Let's not waste time with these two creatures. Let's go. The black and white impermanents were too tanky, so Chen Guang decided to give up on the black and white impermanents and search for new magical beasts. He had just finished speaking when there was a rumbling sound coming from the front and back. The two of them were dumbfounded. Two walls were erected in the front and back of the labyrinth, trapping the two of them and the black and white impermanents. It was called closing the door and beating the dog. Chen Guang gave a thumbs up. I'm in awe. I can't escape even if I want to. As he was ridiculing the black and white impermanents, a notification appeared in their minds. The two of them were entangled with the black and white impermanents for too long. Even the fat household appliance had collected all 10 targets. At this moment, Chen Guang started to panic. Peasant felt that the situation wasn't good. She gritted her teeth and suggested an idea. Mr. Dang, can you release your resistance and let me use time deceleration to trap you, me, and the two black and white impermanents? I'll see if I can stall for time. If you can't collect all the targets by the time you die, we'll be doomed. Chen Guang thought that was a good idea, but he asked, do you have enough reward points? Peasant was about to say that she could only stall for time when she heard the sound of the reward points shop ringing. She looked at the reward points system and almost vomited blood. What was going on? When did I buy the reward points lottery ticket? And I bought 2 consecutive tickets, and they were both top prizes. Did I win the 5 million grand prize? 2 tickets? Why wasn't it a whole number? Why was there an odd number? Also, what was the meaning of can only be used for the operation of the hourglass in the brackets? I won the lottery, and you're asking me if I'm buying a house or a car. She didn't know how to express her feelings and didn't know how to rebuke Dang. She didn't dare to think that the nearly 10 million reward points could be used to upgrade her awakened abilities. Mr. Dang, I have enough reward points, quite enough. I can't explain it in a few words, but it's definitely enough. Peasant understood that she didn't buy the lottery ticket. It must be the mastermind behind the scenes. The mastermind wanted her to record the entire battle between Mr. Dang and the black and white impermanents. The longer the better. This was such a strong desire to peep. Chapter 1190. But wasn't the actions of the mastermind behind the scenes a little too childish? Peasant thought to herself, and she couldn't help but feel suspicious. She was inexplicably given nearly 10 million reward points, which made her have serious doubts about the rigor of the game. She could only keep this matter to herself. She couldn't tell Chen Guang. Chen Guang looked at her suspiciously, but he didn't ask further. Perhaps the tens of thousands of reward points she received were sufficient for her expenses, or perhaps her awakened ability had evolved, so the expenditure wasn't as high. Everyone who participated in this massacre mission had their own secrets. The important thing wasn't why she could do it, but the outcome. A few seconds later, Chen Guang felt a peculiar sensation. However, he didn't feel any obvious changes, so it was still the same as before. When Peasant, who was a distance away, spoke, he discovered the problem. Her voice was extremely low, and it was like a slow-motion voice. Peasant felt something was amiss. He took a step forward and recovered his composure. Success. Chen Guang nodded and said, can you try to control the time flow of the black and white deities around me? Make their movements slower, and it'll be easier for me to deal with them. Peasant shook her head and said, this is called differential control. It's too difficult. I can't do it now. Perhaps I can only do it after my 3rd awakening. She felt regretful. It was a pity that the lottery she won could only be used on her awakened ability and couldn't be upgraded. Otherwise, AI, you're right, I'm thinking too much. Chen Guang turned around and fought with the black and white deities. This time, the battle between Peasant and the 2 magical beasts was like a landslide. They fought from the ground of the labyrinth to the sky, then to the ground, and then to the wall. Even the high walls of the labyrinth of chaos, which were described as indestructible in the illustration card, have been smashed into countless pieces by the fight between the man and the two magical beasts. However, these pieces would disappear abruptly after falling to the ground. As for the scars on the walls, they would also quickly recover. Chen Guang had no choice. He couldn't escape. The black and white deities weren't to be trifled with. They were evolved with advanced technology, and they couldn't be killed. Basically, his techniques could only be used once. The first time was effective, but the second time would be countered. If the black and white deities couldn't deal with his techniques using normal methods, they would forcefully evolve abnormal methods. For example, they would grow a third hand at a critical moment, or their joints could rotate 360 degrees, and they would completely nullify Chen Guang's joint technique. Besides that, Chen Guang's strange techniques that were related to the black and white deities were useless. Even the strongest inner strength could only hit the black and deities of the black and divine. Only simple punches and kicks could hit the bodies of the black and white impermanents, barely causing some damage to these two fellows, but they would quickly recover. Though there was the support of the hourglass, time was ticking by. Chen Guang couldn't sense how much slower Peasant was. After half an hour, he received another notification that a normal gamer had completed the collection. He counted with his fingers. There were less than half of the gamers who hadn't completed the collection. Besides the dead gamers, about 1/3 of the gamers had completed the collection. Tens of hours passed, and he didn't know how much time had passed in the outside world. There were notifications of gamers completing the collection or being reset. After deducting the dead gamers and successful gamers, there were only 6 gamers left. There were 2 weak divine race members, Chen Guang, Peasant, and 2 other weak gamers. During the battle, Chen Guang had to let Peasant carry the functions of a smurf. That was to buy potions. The main character was in charge of fighting, while the smurf had to give the blue and red potions. That was the right thing to do. Every time Chen Guang asked Peasant for the medicine, he felt uncomfortable and couldn't bring himself to ask. The first time he said, "Help me buy some Viagra sustained release capsules." That wasn't appropriate, and it was very wrong. The second time he said, "Help me buy some small blue pills." He still felt that it wasn't right. The third time, he thought of something reliable. Buy potions. Peasant understood the meaning of the word. He didn't need the gold sore medicine, but his stamina was depleted, so he had to take the pills to replenish his body. "Mr. Dang, are we going to die?" Peasant couldn't be bothered to think about the mastermind of the side mission. Not only was Mr. Dang unable to complete the collection mission, but he was also doomed. Chen Guang didn't know how to console her, so he said, "I don't think we're going to die." Just as he finished speaking, there was another notification. The 2 gods had completed their collection. It can't be that the deadline is for everyone to gather, right? As Chen Guang was complaining, he received a piece of bad news. The last 2 ordinary gamers had perished. That meant that in the vast chaos labyrinth, only Peasant and himself were left. That was awkward. With this thought in his heart, Chen Guang did the same thing as before and lashed out with his leg, kicking the black and white impermanents in a casual yet powerful manner. Previously, he had used similar force on the 2 creatures more than 1,000 times, but it was useless. He could only repel them. But this time, it was completely different from before. With a loud bang, the 2 magical beasts that could not be killed no matter how hard they tried suddenly fell apart like broken porcelain. Chen Guang and Peasant were dumbfounded. "That's it," Peasant said in a daze. He seemed to be asking Chen Guang and muttering to himself. Chen Guang asked, "Did you see the target?" Yes. A small man whose face can't be seen, and Peasant bent down and picked up the items that Chen Guang couldn't see. She was bewildered, and she couldn't speak properly. After a brief pondering, Chen Guang figured it out. That person must be his acting idol, and the reason why he couldn't see his face was probably because the miniature version was too crude, or perhaps the slaughtering realm was trying to protect his privacy. As for the other target, he recalled the first target that Peasant collected. If he wasn't wrong, it should be the statue of the strongest pile driver in history. The original statue of God in Cloud City was only an inch long, but for peasants, Chun Guang squinted his eyes and pretended not to understand. He asked, "What's wrong? Is there a problem? Besides a small man, what else is there?" Peasant shook her head and held something in her left and right hands. Then she stood up and said, "It's nothing. I've collected all 10 targets." Chun Guang could tell that she had raised her left hand when she was talking about the little person. Then, the miniature version of the pile driver statue should be in her right hand. However, from the shape of her right hand, it wasn't a miniature version at all. It was exactly the same size as the real one. Didn't that mean that she was holding a miniature version of Chun Guang's? Forget it. He couldn't think about it. It was good to think about it. Chun Guang shuddered. No, it wasn't just Peasant who wanted to collect the divine pile driver statue. The rest of the gamers, including Yu Ting and the strong gamers, wanted to collect the divine pile driver statue. Gosh! He abruptly clutched his chest, and goosebumps rose all over his body like he had been electrocuted. That little bit of happiness in his heart had long since flown beyond the highest heavens. That's strange. Why is there an excavator among the targets? Mr. Adam, do you know why? I didn't want to ask such a childish question, but I couldn't help it. Peasant waved his right hand and asked, excavator? Did you see wrongly? It's a pile driver? Peasant was shocked. It's true. Mr. Adam, aren't you unable to see or touch it? How did you know? She realized something at once. Chun Guang realized that he had said something wrong. He laughed and said, I guessed it. Guessed it? Peasant trembled. I received a notice that I've completed the mission and will be teleported out of the labyrinth of chaos. Chun Guang looked bitter as he said, I also received a notice that the mission time is up. What do we do? Peasant screamed, and her body started to fade uncontrollably. Chun Guang looked at her fading figure and said, You're asking me, but who should I ask? The setting of this lousy mission was illogical. He had failed the mission so easily. Was he going to be erased and reset? His personal strength was clearly the strongest in the entire quest segment, and he had clearly been killing monsters the entire time. Yet, he had encountered such a strange situation. Who could he reason with? Who could he blame? Blame Peasant? It was only right and proper for her to follow him. Strictly speaking, bringing her along could not be considered as bringing along a burden. In such a long period of time, he should have been able to kill more than 20 phantom beasts, but he inexplicably encountered 2 black and white impermanents that couldn't be killed and couldn't run away. He wasted the rest of the time on these 2 overly fierce phantom beasts. If all the illusory beasts were this strong, then he would admit defeat in a fair and square manner. But the others had just passed or been eliminated. The black and white deities were destroyed. The massacre world's motive was obvious. He had lost unjustly. Peasant's figure had completely disappeared. Chun Guang silently lifted his head to look at the crimson vortex that appeared above his head. The electronic notification sounded in his mind. Gamer failed the afternoon mission and will be killed immediately. Along with this voice, a beam of light descended from the sky and enveloped him. Chun Guang was furious. D*menu. I'm not playing anymore. You're cheating me. Chapter 1191. If he was judged to have lost the mission, he wouldn't have been so angry. However, this whole thing was so weird that he couldn't accept it, and he lost in such a weird way. Of course, he wasn't convinced. Unfortunately, he couldn't contact Azure. Otherwise, he could at least find someone to reason with. Now, he had nowhere to redress his grievances and nowhere to vent his anger. He didn't know who he should be angry at. However, the whirlpool above his head that was trying to suck him in was actually covering his body. All of this was telling him that it was King real. The unlucky killing world really wanted to kill him, the owner of the Heavenly Grail. Chun Guang thought that he might have picked up a fake cup, or that the Heavenly Grail recognized a fake owner. How could you mess with the owner like that? Let me be the NPC grandpa who brought people to level, and I accepted it. After all, I am a good person who loves to help others. But why can other people strengthen their abilities, and I can only stare at them? When I finally made myself have N times more reward points than others, and was able to press the button to strengthen my abilities, what kind of awakening ability did you give me? Other people's awakening ability could be turned into combat strength, and, at the very least, it would be a support or a healer, or like the fat household appliance guy, who had some weird abilities. What was this? A ladle that specialized in scamming myself? How many reward points did I lose? I could only stare at the hundreds and thousands of items in the shop. If it wasn't for the fact that I couldn't buy things, I wouldn't have been bothered by the black and white impermanence for so long. There was a magical pill in the shop that could increase combat strength by more than 2 times. Although it was quite expensive, costing up to 1,000,000 reward points, I should have been able to afford it. Stop joking. You want to kill me just like that? Impossible. The light projected from the blood-color vortex seemed to be strange. After it surrounded Chengguang, he gradually felt a strong, tearing force, as if it wanted to tear his body apart. At first, the tearing force was not strong. It was equivalent to a girl pinching the flesh on her body. But gradually, the force became more and more violent. Not only that, but the strange vibration even directly shook the internal energy in Chen Guang's dantian. Of course, Chen Guang would not resign himself to death. Instead, he clenched his teeth and focused all his attention on his dantian, forcefully condensing his inner strength to resist the tearing force from the inside out. At this moment, he felt as if he had fallen into a whirlpool formed by a strong current, or as if he was a piece of tattered clothes thrown into a washing machine. As time passed, the spinning force of the washing machine became more and more violent, and the tearing force on his body became stronger and stronger. At first, Chen Guang only used the conventional convergence of power to resist, but after about 10 seconds, he had to take a horse stance and use a technique like 1,000 pounds falling. After another minute, Chen Guang simply sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes, not daring to be careless. At this time, he didn't look special at all. He didn't even have the original temperament of a martial arts master because he had restrained all the internal energy and momentum into his body. But this was still not enough. The tearing force projected by the blood-color vortex was still increasing, almost endless. Drops of sweat gradually appeared on Chen Guang's forehead, showing how hard he was working at this time. But the strange thing was that even if he felt that his body was about to be torn apart, the sweat on his forehead still didn't move, and even his hair didn't float. At this time, Chen Guang was also ruthless. In his mind, he kept recalling the unique skills that he had learned to deal with qi deviation, such as White Jade Heart Sutra, 18 methods of questioning heaven, delusion-breaking skill, Ice Mountain, and many other strange and unique skills. Under the drive of his true martial divine skill, he used all of them one by one. Only God knew how many kinds of skills he used at the same time. Only a great grandmaster like him, who had spent more than 100,000 years in the realm of true martial arts to thoroughly master 400,000 kinds of unique skills and had figured out a unique skill that could be cultivated to the martial sage realm, could multitask and do this. But there was a limit to a person's ability. After using so many skills for a long time, Chen Guang's brain couldn't take it. Fortunately, each of these techniques had the effect of calming one's mind while stabilizing one's inner strength. In short, they could make one calmer and have a clearer mind. After layers of similar skills were stacked on top of each other, the limits of the brain's operation were greatly developed. It allowed him to use more than 20 different skills in his mind at the same time. But there were also side effects. It was like when a person took too much tranquilizers, his mind would become unclear and he would hallucinate. Extreme calmness and clarity was equivalent to going from one extreme to the other. It could even be said that a person's personality would change drastically. At this time, Chen Guang was in such a state. After layers of skills were stacked on top of each other, he was completely calm, like a Spartan. He didn't know if he was still himself. Although there were many things going on in his mind at the same time, it was as if nothing was happening in his mind. It was as if his mind was completely empty. What's more, in the world in the cup, his body should have been reconstructed with a spiritual body as the foundation. But now he actually had the feeling that his soul was out of his body. Did I look inside too much, causing it to turn into an external vision? At this time, Chen Guang felt very mysterious. It was as if his soul had floated outside, but it was as if nothing had happened. He was only in a trance, vaguely looking at himself outside his body, but it was as if he was still sitting cross-legged on the same spot like an old monk. Suddenly, his body trembled slightly. It seemed that after attacking him for a long time without being able to take him down, the power of the blood-red vortex had once again increased. In addition to the inner strength, the tearing force of the vortex had gone one step further and pounced on another kind of power in his body, which was the Earth Exploder's elemental core. Not only that, the sweat that was stuck to his temples flew out with a whoosh. Finally, it started to work on his body. For a moment, the tearing force of the blood-red vortex that was used to kill him became a triple effect from his body to his inner strength, and then to the elemental power. Of course, Chen Guang would not sit still and wait for death. So far, he had not used the rather strange talent of the Earth Exploder, because under normal circumstances, this skill was basically useless. But now is the time to take it out. With another thought, his body, which had just begun to tremble slightly under the influence of the tearing force, suddenly became completely still again. If someone else were to see it, they would notice that the surface of his body had suddenly glowed with a metallic luster. In just a few seconds, with the center of his eyebrows as the source point, his body gradually became transparent. Like the water in a cup that was suddenly frozen, his body quickly became completely transparent at a speed visible to the naked eye. That's right, Chen Guang's skill was called the legendary petrification. And what he petrified was not ordinary stone, but diamond. It's completely different from Medusa's petrification. Although Chen Guang could also use it, he's more formidable when it comes to petrifying himself. It's a complete petrification without leaving any openings. His entire body would turn transparent. If someone picked it up, coupled with a bald image of him sitting cross-legged and meditating, that person would probably be happy that they had obtained the crystal Buddha statue for free. The only flaw was that he was not dressed in a serious manner and was not wearing kasaya. Once the diamond transformation was used, the effect was outstanding. The tearing force of the blood-red vortex instantly became a tickle. Baldy Chen Guang said, "How can a small fry like you want to kill the old man? Why don't you think about who your real master is? Go to sleep and quickly pass the test for me. Trying to trick me? No way." Outside, the two groups of players who had escaped from the labyrinth of chaos were still clearly divided into two groups. On one side were the mortals, and on the other side were the Protoss. Both sides were solemn, and each had their own ulterior motives. Many of the Protoss members had perished. Without Yu Ting's reminder, the other Protoss members knew the difficulty of the mission. If they were not careful, their projections would perish here. On the other side, the mortals felt as though they were struck by lightning. They didn't expect their backer, Mr. Dang, to perish in the labyrinth of chaos without a word. It was a blow to their heads. Miss Peasant, did Mr. Dang not collect a single target at the last moment? The hale and hearty old man asked in disbelief. Peasant nodded and said, "It's my fault. If I hadn't traveled with him and allowed him to act alone, he would have been the first gamer to leave the labyrinth of chaos. You knew you would be a burden to him, but you insisted on pestering him. I don't think you're that noble," the card magician said sarcastically. Previously, he didn't like Dang Wu, but when he realized that he might lose his backer, the card magician felt pain. Previously, he had always disliked Tang Wu, but when he realized that he might really lose his backer, the card magician knew what it meant to be in pain. "Yes, it's my fault." Peasant didn't want to defend herself. Though she had suggested splitting up with Dang many times, she knew that she didn't want to do so because she had the side mission that she couldn't escape from. The elf archer stood up for her and said, "What do you mean? What's the point of saying such nonsense? Do you want Peasant to commit suicide as an apology to the world? Why do you have to criticize Peasant? Why? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to talk about it? Now that Mr. Dang is gone, nobody will spoil you. You'd better behave yourself." The elf archer raised his eyebrows and took out his inferior elven warrior magical bow. He knocked an arrow and aimed at the car magician. "Oh, do you think I'm afraid of you? What internal strife? Do you think I'm afraid of you? The card magician frowned. He flicked his wrist, and 4 cards appeared between his fingers. The atmosphere on the scene became tense and hostile for a moment. We've been out for more than 3 minutes, and there's no notification of Mr. Dang Wu's death. The huge labyrinth walls haven't disappeared. Perhaps to us, the mission is over. But to him, the mission is still ongoing. At this moment, it was the genius high school student who raised a different point of view, inadvertently reminding the others. The magical archer and magic magician put away their weapons. They felt that the high school student was right. All right, everyone calm down. Mission 8 isn't over. We have to believe in Dang Wu's ability. Now, let's be on alert. Those who have Third Awakening should make good use of the time. There's only one mission left. We can't drop the ball at the last moment. The hale and hearty old man stood up and controlled the situation. Chapter 1192. On the other side, Chun Guang, who had completely transformed into a diamond Buddha statue, still maintained his complete consciousness. However, he himself felt that it was a little strange. There were still countless meridians in his sparkling and translucent body that allowed him to circulate his inner strength. However, this inner strength had turned into a completely formless and colorless liquid. It flowed steadily, slowly, but with a high efficiency through his meridians, maintaining the effects of the cultivation technique. This was a very mysterious state. It was just like a novel that Chun Guang had once read, in which the legendary silicon-based organism was mentioned. At that time, he was very surprised. Wasn't silicon-based silicon dioxide, which was also quartz? How did people with quartz think? Quartz didn't conduct electricity, so how did brain waves work? He was puzzled no matter how he thought about it. Now, he roughly understood a little. Pure quartz looked extremely similar to diamond. In addition, diamond didn't conduct electricity, but his brain was still working smoothly. This meant that silicon-based wasn't important. It had nothing to do with how he thought. As for the scientific principle behind it, come on, I'm already in the world within the cup. Why are you still talking to me about science? In short, after transforming into a diamond, the tearing force transmitted by the blood-color vortex completely lost its effect on him for the time being. The so-called direct obliteration of the slaughtering world was met with the strongest resistance from him, the master of the transcendent Holy Grail. Only he could forcefully resist the command of the slaughtering world. If it were anyone else, even the most tyrannical divine emperor of the Protoss, the divine emperor of Yuting, could only close his eyes and wait for death. This direct obliteration force continued to grow stronger and stronger. However, the diamond Buddha statue that Chun Guang had transformed into remained immovable. The naked eye couldn't see the difference, but in reality, Chun Guang's physical body was still slowly petrifying. This subtle change was merely concealed by his completely transparent body. There was no end to the beautification of the structure of matter. Even if the most advanced microscope of human technology could never see any difference, it could happen at the level of molecules, atoms, and even electrons, and even the smaller core particles. It was like a chemical reaction. Matter would constantly react and evolve towards a more stable form. Of course, there would always be a limit to normal chemical reactions. It had to conform to the rules of the universe. For example, if hydrogen and oxygen were mixed and burned to produce water, it would not produce a more stable substance that humans had never seen before. Because in the current state of the universe, water was already the most stable structure of hydrogen and oxygen compounds. Another example was the structure of the carbon atom. Carbon-60, diamond, and graphite were all very stable, but when it came to hardness, diamond was undoubtedly the strongest. It could even be said that under the laws of the real universe, the hardness of diamond was the extreme of the carbon atom structure. However, this was the world in the cup, Chun Guang's territory. Strictly speaking, no matter how similar this world was to the real world, there was a fundamental difference. These were two completely different worlds, so the rules would naturally be different. That was exactly what was happening at the moment. His body was trembling ever so slightly, and with every tremble, the Vajra Buddha statue's deepest layer of particles would undergo a subtle change, making his body even more sturdy, using physical methods to seal his inner strength and elemental power within his body. There were advantages and disadvantages to doing this. The advantages were self-evident, but the disadvantages were reflected in his thinking. Obviously, there was a difference in the way carbon-based creatures and silicon-based creatures thought. One used bioelectricity to form thoughts and brainwaves, while the other, well, Qinguang did not know what that was. It was all nonsense in novels, and he had to experience it himself to know how powerful it was. As a newly minted Vajra Buddha statue, he felt that his body structure was becoming more and more solid and hard, but his brain was not working very well. To put it simply, his thinking had become rigid and completely out of control. The old man was too careless. I was still feeling proud just now, but karma came quickly. Chun Guang silently muttered to himself. It was such a simple sentence, but it took him at least a minute to think of it. Forget it. Anyway, I'll just pretend that I set a default program for myself and let it run automatically. At this time, as his thinking solidified, it actually became more effortless. He did not need to deliberately urge the dozens of techniques that were running at the same time. His mind was like a computer automatically rendering blueprints, advancing the mental cultivation method control automatically. On the other hand, Chun Guang added another setting to his mind and continued to strengthen the process of perfecting the Vajra Buddha statue. In short, he was going to go head-to-head with the world of slaughter. He would not resign himself to fate. After setting the default program, the thoughts in his mind completely stopped. It was a bit like he had fallen into a deep sleep, and also a bit like he was being hypnotized. In a muddle-headed state, his mind was in chaos, and everything around him began to become hazy. Moreover, as time passed, his thoughts became slower and slower, and his thoughts became more and more relaxed. He forgot about the blood-colored vortex above his head, forgot about the world of slaughter, and even forgot that he was currently under the direct obliteration of the world within a cup. The tearing force transmitted by the vortex became stronger and stronger. If this was the outside world, this kind of force could tear apart everything. Even the sturdiest concrete floor would be completely torn into powder or even annihilated. But there was a description written on the walls and floor of this maze of chaos. Indestructible. Even if fragments fell due to a short period of shaking, these fragments would instantly dissipate into the most primitive form of energy and then return to the walls or floor. The floor and high walls of the maze of chaos were nearly invincible, and there was a completely invincible energy cycle. At this time, the Vajra Buddha statue was surrounded by a dense fog. This fog was the powder that had been forcibly torn off the floor, but often before it could float past the head of the Vajra Buddha statue, it would quickly collapse and then directly return to the ground in the form of energy. About 2 minutes later, deep pitch-black cracks appeared around the Vajra statue that Chun Guang had transformed into like a spiderweb. These cracks all disappeared in a flash, and the time they existed was extremely short, perhaps not even a femtosecond. It was impossible to see with the naked eye, but it made people feel that the light around Chun Guang had dimmed a bit. About another 2 minutes later, these cracks that should not have been seen with the naked eye gradually became clear. The reason was that after the small cracks came together, they fused in pairs and even existed for a slightly longer time. If there was a crack that was lucky, then before it disappeared, another crack would luckily appear next to it, and after fusing again, it would exist for a longer time. These countless small and undetectable coincidences combined to form hair-thin cracks that were scattered around Qinguang. After a while, these cracks became thicker and thicker, and in the end, they were even as thick as a thumb. There was only endless darkness within the cracks, a bottomless darkness. This was space being torn apart, but Chun Guang's Vajra body still stood tall. When space was torn to the extreme, it could not break through the indestructible floor of the labyrinth of chaos, and at the same time, it could not destroy the Vajra statue Chun Guang, standing in the middle. The tearing force further strengthened, and thus affected the flow of time. time was endlessly accelerated, and thus affected Chun Guang's thinking. His originally extremely slow thinking suddenly returned to a normal speed. This was an extremely mysterious and indescribable state. Vaguely, he felt as if his mind was traveling to the ends of the world. His mind was chaotic and hazy, but he could see everything clearly. He felt as if he had fallen into a dream. This dream was boundless and incomparably vast. This feeling was even greater than when he had upgraded the heavenly Holy Grail from the first to the second level, and his mind had followed the power of the Holy Grail to roam the universe. But he could not see anything clearly. There was no galaxy in his mind, and he did not even have the concept of space and time. Suddenly, he seemed to hear the sound of something breaking. It sounded like a butterfly breaking out of a cocoon, or like a phoenix undergoing nirvana. After he completely let go of his thoughts, he suddenly turned his head and saw a tender sprout growing out of thin air in the void. It then soared into the sky and extended towards the boundless horizon. No, it could not be called the horizon. At this moment, he did not have the concept of up and down, left and right, nor did he have the concept of time in the past, present, and future. After the sound of something breaking, it seemed as if millions of years had passed, but also seemed as if it had only taken an instant to form this enormous plant in front of him. Suddenly, Chen Guang's consciousness trembled slightly. He lowered his head and looked down again. He actually saw an endless root system at the bottom of this plant. This root system was intertwined and spread out, and it was like a huge cloud that enveloped the bottomless abyss below. He actually saw an endless root system beneath the plant. The root system was intertwined and spread out, like a huge cloud that shrouded the bottomless abyss below. The thickness of this plant's root system and the area it spread out over was at least 10 times that of its upper body. It was so enormous that it could not be described with words. Chen Guang did not understand what this meant at all. He did not even know how his consciousness had entered this mysterious state. At this moment, the truly emotionless electronic notification of the heavenly Holy Grail suddenly rang in his heart. Congratulations, Redeemer. You have fulfilled the conditions. The heavenly Holy Grail is upgrading. Chen Guang was overjoyed. Although he did not know what conditions he had fulfilled, he had inexplicably upgraded the broken Grail. This was a blessing in disguise. Just as he was happily thinking about it, a loud noise suddenly came from the void. A thud. It sounded like thunder, but also like someone was stamping their feet. Upgrade complete. Redeemer is currently performing a mission. The next mission will be directly upgraded to the third layer, Cloud Elephant Sky. Redeemer's current mission environment is abnormal. Repairing. Beep, beep, beep. This sound was a little like the sound of the motherboard's self-test program when a computer was booted up. Then Chen Guang thought he had heard wrongly. To his surprise, he heard a sharp and clear scream. Nothing happened after the scream, but the tearing force that had enveloped his body suddenly disappeared. The notification sounded again, but this time it was the slightly strange electronic notification that made him feel like it might have feelings. Congratulations, player. You have successfully resisted the obliteration. The Labyrinth of Chaos mission is completed. Reward points will be issued immediately. Chen Guang cursed in his mind at a super slow yet super fast speed. What kind of lousy mission system is this? There's such a godly operation, forcefully resisting and successfully completing the mission. Chapter 1193. Also, who was the one screaming just now? What was that dong sound? Whose moral integrity had fallen to the ground? Forget it. It was not important. Since he had successfully resisted it, he could finally relax and slowly remove the petrified state. He did not dare to disperse his cultivation first. If it were not for the dozens of martial emperor's secret arts that could stabilize the mind, he did not know whether his will could withstand the shock of turning into an immovable diamond. Who can tell me what's going on now? You ask me, but who should I ask? Didn't they say that the Labyrinth of Chaos mission is over? Why is the 9th mission not here yet? What do you think the ninth mission might be? Is it killing monsters or a labyrinth? Or something else? Forget it, don't guess. In any case, it definitely won't be as simple as the cockroach mission. This is the last stage. If we can pass it, we might be able to get out. The fat household appliance student said happily, "This is really a special experience. From now on, I will no longer be the same person as before. The first thing I will do when I get back is to fire my boss." Ha ha ha. Damn, fatty. You're a salesperson in an electrical appliance store outside, right? The genius high school student suddenly asked. The fatty was shocked. How did you know? The genius high school student snorted and then said, "It's all written on your face. I'm just reminding you that it's best not to talk about the outside world here. Everyone here is smart. If you talk a little more, they might guess where you are and what you're doing. Even if we can leave this place soon, no one knows what will happen in the future. Rashly exposing your true identity is undoubtedly very dangerous. For example, who knows if we can keep our memories after we get out? Also, will everyone's reward points be snatched by others? Otherwise, in the face of the threat of life and death, what will you do if others ask you to obediently hand over the things you bought?" When he said these words, he did not deliberately avoid the others. Instead, he deliberately raised his voice. When the others heard this, they did not express their opinion. Although they did not say the ugly words as clearly as he did, they actually thought so in their hearts. "Oh, I understand. Then I can't even tell you?" The fat household appliance student asked with his shoulders shrunk. The genius high school student smiled calmly. "If you're willing to tell me, of course I'm willing to listen." Fatty always felt that this young man's expression was very sinister, but he could also be pretending to be sinister to scare people. Forget it. Let's change the topic. What does it mean to be a teacher? Ask him yourself. Outside, the crowd who had been waiting for God knows how long could not help but whisper. Although no one had a watch on them, everyone had a simple concept of time. Unknowingly, several hours had passed, but there was still no movement. No one knew what was going on. Everyone was panicking, but they couldn't find an answer. "Let's wait. We have no other choice." Peasant finally spoke. As the only person present who knew the inside story, she was actually the most knowledgeable. Others might not know if the mission had really failed that afternoon, but she had seen it with her own eyes and knew it clearly. If it was someone else, Peasant would have died. But Tang Wu was different. Peasant felt that Tang Wu wouldn't die so easily. Perhaps he could resist the rules of the game system. Perhaps he was doing that now. Otherwise, why was there no movement even after the Chaos Labyrinth mission had ended? On the other hand, after Chen Guang's mission was judged to be completed, he wasn't released immediately. After an hour, he was finally released from his petrified state and the state of absolute calmness. He stood up in bewilderment. He examined his body and surveyed his surroundings. He was still in the Chaos Labyrinth, but there were no side effects from the petrification. His movements were slightly inconvenient, but it was probably due to poor blood circulation after meditating for a long time. He would be fine after taking a few more steps. "Hey, is there anyone here? Let me out after my mission is completed." He shouted at the top of his lungs, but no one answered him. Truth be told, Chen Guang wasn't really hoping for anyone to pay attention to him. It's just that he had vaguely heard a moment ago that made him suspicious. Hence, he purposely acted to see if he could trick the person who might or might not exist. But he didn't succeed, and no one responded to him. After waiting for a long time, there were finally changes. First, the promised reward points arrived in his account. He heard a series of dang-dang sounds in his system. Chen Guang accessed his system and looked at it intently. He was convinced. He saw the number of his reward points jump at a rather strange speed. One moment, it rose by a few thousand points, and in the next moment, it was cleared out with a whoosh. Fine, it was the same old problem of missing out on everything. Unlucky cup, what happened to the promised repair? You can't even repair a hole. Go back and fix the sewers. 100,000 reward points have been distributed. Please use them wisely. Chen Guang rolled his eyes. There was no need to be cautious. He didn't need to use them. Thank you. Wasn't it too shabby to only give 100,000 points? Previously, he had earned nearly 10 million points from Hades. Though he didn't get any blisters, it was better to have more points. Then, a gust of wind suddenly blew into his face from who knows where. He looked up and saw that the indestructible walls of the labyrinth of chaos were covered in fog. At the same time, they were rapidly disintegrating from top to bottom. Letting out a sigh in his heart, Chun Guang muttered to himself, "Mission 9 is finally here. I wonder what kind of monster I have to fight." Just as he was thinking about this, he suddenly saw the fog that was originally soaring into the sky suddenly change direction and pounce straight towards his position. Wait, what the hell is this? Is it going to be a divine infusion? But isn't this the energy that formed the walls? Is it going to turn me into a cement man? Besides, shouldn't it be time to prepare for Task 9? Isn't the labyrinth of chaos over? It would be fine if the walls just disappeared. Why is it coming at me? It was a pity that what was happening would not change because of his complaints. In the blink of an eye, he was completely wrapped up in the extremely thick white fog once again. Not only that, even though he had already shut his mouth and held his breath, he was still unable to stop the fog from entering his body through the capillaries on the surface of his body. In an instant, he felt that there was something different in his body. Seeing that the situation was not good, he used a ruthless move. He made the earthen yellow armor on the surface of his body continue to cover up, wrapping his entire body. Not only that, he also solidified the surface of the armor until it glowed with a metallic luster, making it completely airtight. In any case, he had practiced the embryonic breathing technique, so it was not a problem for him to not breathe for a long time. With regards to this kind of unknown power, Chun Guang felt that it was best not to come into contact with it. He had just become a diamond Buddha statue, and in the blink of an eye, he had become a stone statue. If this went on, he would have to change his name to a stone man. However, his resistance only lasted for perhaps less than 5 seconds. In the blink of an eye, the fog was like before, directly passing through space and appearing in his body. Seeing this, he also accepted his fate. Since he could not stop it, he could only say that he was ruthless. Chun Guang thought to himself, I can't be killed after completing the mission, right? Maybe this is an additional reward from the heavenly Holy Grail for repairing the slaughter world. That's good. If I think like this, everything is right. Life is like being forced. Since I can't resist, I'll just close my eyes and enjoy it. In any case, even if I open my eyes now, I can't see anything, only a vast expanse of whiteness in front of me. I'll probably be fine after a while. Maybe before completely losing consciousness. This was what Chun Guang thought to himself. At the same time, the people outside were also looking at the rapidly disappearing walls of the labyrinth. Everyone also let out a long sigh of relief. It was finally going to end. However, it was unknown who reacted first, but someone said loudly, "Did everyone notice? We didn't hear the notification that Mr. Dang was killed in battle." Everyone shuddered. But there was no notification that he completed the mission either. Then is he dead or not? What are you saying? Can you speak? Do you want Mr. Dang to die? I didn't mean that. I'm just curious. Come on, that's what you're thinking. I can see your complacent expression. If you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. What do you want? Do you think I'm afraid of you? After the MMA instructor died, the hale and hearty old man became a little more proactive. Seeing that the two of them were getting fiercer and fiercer, he suddenly stood up and yelled, all right, everyone stop talking. We're almost at Task 9. If we don't unite, we'll really die here." The quarreling duo was startled awake and stopped using their divine powers. Peasant stood at the side and didn't say a word. She frowned, and her mind was replaying everything that had happened. She had a feeling that no one would believe her even if she told them about it. Though Mr. Dang said that he was an experienced gamer, Peasant felt that the entire game was against him. From the beginning of the mission, to the side missions that were forcefully assigned to him like a thief, to the unfair treatment he received in the labyrinth, there was an inexplicable sense of strangeness. All the signs showed that the gamers and Mr. Dang weren't playing the same game. Just like now, although the process was incomparably ridiculous, his mission was indeed a complete failure. But he didn't die. Even though the labyrinth was collapsing, he didn't die. Something beyond the gamer's understanding must have happened. Forget it, he should be out soon. Let's see if we can ask him directly. Peasant recalled the encounter in Mission 8 and felt ashamed and worried. He felt that he had tricked Mr. Dang badly in the labyrinth, so Dang wouldn't bother with him. If it were Peasant, he would have the intention to kill. Lord Yuting, should we charge in and take a look? If Dang Zheng isn't in a good situation, we can, in the celestial camp. Wethany lowered her voice and used her divine power to shield herself as she spoke carefully. Yuting was tempted, but he shook his head and said, "No, let's observe the situation first. Dang Zheng won't die so easily. If he isn't in a good situation, it'll be dangerous for us to act rashly." When they were dealing with the Hades fire, the Celestials had suffered greatly because they underestimated their enemy. They thought they could kill Dang Zheng, but they didn't expect Dang Zheng to counterattack. This seemed to be an opportunity, but who knew if Dang Zheng would turn misfortune into a blessing? Deep in Yuting's heart, he didn't want to admit another thing. He knew that the projected Celestials were going to deal with Dang Zheng, but Dang Zheng saved the lives of the Celestials during the Mosquito mission. It was unimaginable that she would feel gratitude towards him. He couldn't tell his subordinates the truth, so he had to find a reasonable excuse. Fortunately, he had sufficient prestige among the Celestials, so nobody doubted his decision. After a long time, Chen Guang opened his eyes slowly. He was surprised to find that he had grown taller. It wasn't just a little taller. It was at least 10 times his original height. He scratched his head out of habit, wondering if the wall of the labyrinth of chaos had increased in size after he merged with it. As soon as he scratched, he realized that something was wrong. His hand couldn't reach his head. Damn, did my hand become shorter? He tried to lift his hand, and then he let out a goo in shock. That's right, it was a goo. Damn, I've become a monster. Looking at the palm in front of him, Chen Guang didn't even have the mood to complain. How is this a hand? It was clearly a wing. F***CK. That was what he thought, but what came out of his mouth was a goo. At that moment, Chen Guang suddenly discovered that there were two groups of people standing a few dozen meters in front of him. One was a group of ordinary players, and the other was the Celestials led by Yuting. With a grunt from his mouth, the two groups of people retreated one after another. Hey, what's going on with you guys? Chen Guang wanted to ask the others, but all that came out of his mouth was a series of goo's. Then, the two groups were shocked and immediately retreated further and further away, looking as if they wanted to keep a respectful distance. Forget it. So be it. Chen Guang was also annoyed. He turned around and planned to find a corner to crouch by himself. At the same time, he checked his other skill, the legendary strongest language master in history. Then, he quickly gave up. All right, although I'm proficient in close to 5,000 languages on Earth, I haven't learned the real bird language. All right, if it was on Earth, with the old man's social skills, it wouldn't be impossible to chat with animals. Although I can't completely read the minds of animals, with my rich social experience, I can guess most of it. But I really haven't learned how to speak to humans after I become a bird. Oh, right, I can use my feet. All right, use my claws to write. Chen Guang turned around and faced the two groups of players who were ready for battle. He raised his claws, and the two groups retreated dozens of meters. Chen Guang grinned proudly. It should be split beak. You idiots, what are you afraid of? I won't eat you. He wasn't too worried. He was about to start the 9th mission. After clearing the mission, he would be a good man again, and it wouldn't affect his body in the outside world. Then, he planned to use his claws to write on the ground of the ancient Roman Colosseum. At this moment, the mission notification suddenly rang in everyone's mind. All players, attention, the 9th mission will officially start in 3 minutes. Mission description: kill the blood pigeon. The reward will be distributed according to the damage contribution of all players. Special reminder: after the 9th mission is completed, the mission will be cleared and the final settlement will be entered. Special reminder too: all players, please hurry up and improve your strength. The blood pigeon is very strong. Do not be careless. Chen Guang thought to himself, what kind of unlucky big boss is this? It's actually being targeted by the game system. There's even such a thoughtful reminder. It's clearly telling everyone not to save up, quickly become stronger, and use all of your abilities to kill the blood pigeon. Haha, if I were that blood pigeon, I would definitely be cursing. Chen Guang took a deep breath. Although he didn't have any reward points to use, after absorbing the hellfire for a period of time, coupled with his huge body that was dozens of meters tall, his combat strength was definitely not just for show. When that blood pigeon came out, he would pounce on it and kill it, and then be done with it. Wait, he raised his right hand and swallowed his saliva. F***CK, Uncle Lee, goo 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 goo. F***CK, I'm that blood pigeon. In other words, if I forcefully removed the erase setting, it would be the same as dodging the player's mission. Then, with the Holy Grail's correction, this killing mission would be completely my own. So the player's mission was to kill the blood pigeon. The old man's mission was to eat all the players to death. Does that mean that I was wholeheartedly nurturing the human race players, but I was actually nurturing my enemies? When I saved Yu Ting and the other Protoss, I was also saving my final enemy. Fix your sister. Fix it. I might as well not fix it. Chapter 1194. I don't have much time left. Chen Guang muttered to himself. Then he discovered that the gazes of the two groups of mortals changed after the mission notification was given. The mortals panicked for a short while. Many of them extended their necks in bewilderment and looked around as though they were searching for something. Chen Guang knew that they were looking for him. There was no news of his death, so they hoped that he was still alive. It was a pity that their plans were in vain. He was standing in front of them, but they couldn't recognize him. As for the divine race, there were less than 20 of them left. Those who were able to survive until now weren't ordinary. They were the elites of the divine world and the experts of the experts. 5 short seconds later, the gods all came up with an idea. They either bought items or clenched their teeth and pressed the strengthening button. Then, their bodies glowed with light, and their auras rose. Peasant realized that he couldn't find Mr. Dang. He turned his head and shouted, "Everyone, be alert. This is the last mission. Since there's no news of Mr. Dang's death, he must be alive. Even if he can't help us due to certain reasons, we're much stronger than before. We have to learn to rely on ourselves." "That's right. It's time to show our true abilities," the genius student said as he stood up and shouted to the crowd. The genius middle school student said as he stood up and said loudly to the crowd, "Everyone who has completed the third awakening, if you're interested in trying my methods, you can come over here. I can help you strengthen your abilities, but the numbers are limited. First come, first serve." The genius youth was finally willing to reveal his abilities. Although everyone already guessed it, it was still too unbelievable. "Really?" The car magician came up to him and asked happily, "Oh, I forgot to mention that besides the few of you, the rest can try." "What do you mean?" The card magician was unhappy. The young genius glanced at him and said, "Nothing much. I don't like you, so I'm unhappy. It's that simple." The magician was furious, but he didn't have a chance to protest. The hale and hearty old man, Fireball Magician, and the others gathered around. The old man looked at him with a serious face. "Time is tight. Let's not dawdle and hurry up." The Fireball Mage, on the other hand, asked, "Little brother, how many people can you use your ability?" "Sorry to trouble you." The young genius stretched out 5 fingers. 5, but I have to say this up front. When I'm adjusting your awakened abilities, you must have complete trust in me. Also, I can't guarantee that the effects will be positive after using it. Just like a brother in my team who was tricked by me. That's why he didn't live until now. I can't do anything about it. Are you kidding me? You can't guarantee the effect, and you still want others to trust you wholeheartedly. Forget it. I can't do it anyway. Just pretend I didn't say anything. The car magician cursed and turned to leave. Seeing this, the young genius shrugged indifferently. "See, I knew it would be like this. God knows how lucky these people are to be able to survive until now. All right, let's start now." The young man clapped his hands and urged. The rest of them looked at each other for a while. The hale and hearty elder stood out and said, "Let me try first." The rest didn't argue with him. Not everyone was willing to expose their abilities to others. Besides, they knew that with their suspicious nature, it was hard for them to trust others. The process wasn't complicated. The young genius tapped the elder's forehead. After a few seconds, he released his finger. The elder didn't say anything. He turned his head and sat down at the side. Someone asked the elder how the situation was, but he smiled and didn't say anything. He didn't say anything good or bad. While the rest were hesitating, Peasant gritted her teeth and walked forward. "Let me do it." The young genius' eyes lit up. Compared to the rest, I'm more curious to know what changes will happen to Miss Peasant's ability. I know you can control time. There was an uproar. In many novels, the ability to control time was the highest level ability. In Xuanhua novels, the rule of time was higher than the rule of space. How did you know? The elf magician archer knocked an arrow and aimed at the young genius. The young genius shrugged nonchalantly and said, "When I sprayed the mosquito repellent, I felt uncomfortable for a short while. Then, I felt like I was pressed on the slow button. I can't explain the feeling, but I know it's real. I've been observing everyone. Besides Miss Peasant, the rest of them have displayed their abilities. Miss Peasant is holding an hourglass in her hand. Besides the ability to control time, what else can she do? I'm not a fool." "All right, stop talking. There's not much time left." Peasant interrupted them and urged them. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. The young genius did the same. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. The young genius did the same. On the other side, Chen Guang had already decided to make the first move. He tried to take a step forward in an attempt to kill his way to the Protoss. Just as he had this thought, he discovered that he couldn't move. It was as though he was stuck in cement. He was locked on by the massacre mission. Since he couldn't move, his attempt to communicate by writing was futile. Forget it, 3 minutes it is. They can't defy the heavens, even if it's 3 minutes. Chen Guang thought worriedly as he looked at the two camps. He was in a dilemma. He didn't care about the gods as long as they were pecked to death. However, the mortals were a huge problem. The poker lads and the MMA instructor were jackals of the same tribe. It was fine if they were killed. The old man and his companions felt apologetic, but they wouldn't be bothered even if they were pecked to death. The magical beast trio had similar thoughts. It wouldn't be a problem for the mean student to be gnawed to death. As for peasant AI, Chen Guang was in a dilemma when he thought about it. Could it be that he really had to destroy a flower? That wasn't the old man's style. He felt that peasant was an acquaintance of his from the outside world. After such a long time, he had guessed her identity, but he didn't reveal it. His body was filming the variety show Hi, My God, near the filming site. When the world and the cup descended, if a few gifted mortals were to be sucked in, Chu Zijin, who was the closest to him, would be the first to be sucked in. Hence, peasant was most likely Chu Zijin. Chen Guang didn't have time to reveal it, but he couldn't do so now. Based on the principle of a dead friend, and a dead friend, Chen Guang was worried about the meaning of the reset. If it was to wipe out all the memories and turn a person into a retard, it would be a huge sin. He would be letting down the party and the people, as well as the motherland. It would also cause Tianguang Media, which was in a bad situation, to lose its backbone. This old man's heart is really tormented right now. It's really hard for me to do this. Gosh, they're trying to kill me. As Chen Guang was muttering to himself, the Celestials and Mortals had completed their preparations. Compared to before the start of Mission 8, the surviving 40 players were like a completely different person. Whether it was their attire or their aura, they had undergone a complete transformation. The standard battle uniforms that everyone was wearing were long gone. What replaced them were all kinds of divine equipment that each person had made for themselves. They were either wearing shiny armor in the style of Western magic, or feather fans and silk scarves that were filled with the flavor of Eastern Xinxia. They were also wearing the bright silver chainmail that Erlang Shun was wearing, or the jade-like elven leather armor that flashed with green light that the female elf archer was wearing. The Celestials were even scarier. Chen Guang was afraid. Yu Ting's face was indiscernible. His entire body was covered in lightning and thunder armor. Wethany had also changed into a bright blue robe. Perhaps it was not the right size, but it dragged a few meters behind her. With Chen Guang's years of gaming experience, he could tell that these guys were equipped with godly equipment that was at least plus 12 or plus 18. Damn it, when this old man was protecting all of you from acting tough, all of you were hiding your true strength. Now that you're making things difficult for me, all of you can't wait to take out all of your capital. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? As he complained, his body suddenly lightened. He could move again. The 3-minute wait was over. F***CK. Goo. Chen Guang cursed and rushed towards the Celestials. He had not thought of how to deal with the mortals yet, but killing the Celestials first was definitely not a bad idea. Out of habit, he took a step forward. Then, he prepared to take a horse stance and unleash a palm strike that could topple mountains and overturn seas. However, when he unleashed it, he realized that he had no palm, only chicken wings. No, it was pigeon wings. The huge wings of the pigeon suddenly spun along with his body, and when they flapped forward, they brought up a scarlet whirlwind. The visible red whirlwind carried a thick stench of blood as it swept towards the Celestials. He did not use the earth-shattering palm, but he did use the blood pigeon's innate ability, Sea of Blood. But at this time, the Shun clan was not to be trifled with. They remained calm in the face of danger. One by one, they leaped up in extremely fast speed. It was like the 8 immortals crossing the sea, each displaying their own remarkable abilities. At this moment, Chen Guang's massive body had slowed down his movements. Thus, his first wing, which seemed to be powerful, missed. In the next moment, a bolt of lightning struck his head, charring a few feathers on his head. Raising his head, Chen Guang saw that the lightning came from the tip of Yu Ting's spear, which was hovering not too far away. At the same time, he fiercely lowered his head, only to see that the Colosseum floor under his feet had abruptly turned into a soft swamp. His 2 claws were continuously sinking into the soft swamp mud that was suffused with green light. The swamp extended from where he was standing all the way to where Wethany was. It was her dress that was playing tricks on him. Not only that, but this brief moment of entrapment immediately caused him to be enveloped by countless attacks. All sorts of dazzling and powerful attacks landed on his body. Some of them were light enough to scratch an itch, but some were like Yu Ting's lightning, causing seemingly minute but accumulating damage. For a moment, Chen Guang was at a disadvantage because he was not used to the blood pigeon's body. There was more bad news. The Celestials had taken the initiative. Logically, the mortals should just sit back and watch. However, because the quest notification clearly stated that the final quest reward would be calculated based on the amount of damage each person dealt, no one was willing to slack off. Everyone used their trump cards one after another. The old man and his companions hid in the Apocalypse tank, which had a few black and thick tubes attached to it. With the old man's command, the Apocalypse tank buzzed, and the 8 thick tubes lit up at the same time. In an instant, 2 depleted uranium supermagnetic storm bombs flew out. 2 light blue ion beams with a high-temperature burning effect shot out. 4 Gatling guns fired wildly at Chen Guang, and the heavy lead core bullets rained down on Chen Guang. As for the others, there were big fireballs, deadly flying daggers, King of Hearts, and so on. Peasant didn't charge forward personally. Instead, he stood beside the elven archer. No one knew what he was up to. The elven archer knocked an arrow, while Peasant held an hourglass in one hand and placed his fingertips on the tail of the elven archer's magic arrow. There was a swishing sound. The elven archer released her fingers, and the magic arrow that was in front of her seemed to traverse space and appear between the eyebrows of Chen Guang's blood pigeon body. After the mutation of his awakened abilities, Peasant was able to use time acceleration on the magic arrow of the elven archer. Chen Guang felt that he was about to cry. I'm seeing a ghost. Do you have to be so ruthless? Why didn't I see you being so capable? Chapter 1195. Chen Guang flicked his head and pecked away the magic arrows that were right in front of him. At the same time, he racked his brain to think of a way to change the situation. After discovering that he was the final boss, he was momentarily at a loss and fell into a rather awkward situation. These people were too aggressive. They were completely different from when he was still around as a nanny. Faced with the final quest, almost all the players seemed to be on steroids. After all, everyone was determined to clear Quest 9 and leave this godforsaken place happily. As for the rewards that they would receive after completing all the tests, and whether they could leave this place alive, it wasn't something that they cared about. The quest notification specifically mentioned that this blood pigeon was very powerful and terrifying. Therefore, they couldn't let their guard down. They had to give it their all from the very beginning. They couldn't afford to be careless. From the beginning, there were close to 100 people who entered the quest. Now, there were less than 50 people who survived. No one dared to be careless and seek their own death. Of course, there was nothing wrong with the player's attitude. However, Chun Guang, who had transformed into a blood pigeon, was suffering. His current situation was very similar to when he fought the final boss in World of Warcraft. The players had to use all of their abilities to attack the boss. His current state was very similar to when he was fighting in a dungeon. He had transformed into a boss that could only move according to the system's settings. He struggled and roared, waving his frightening weapons. However, the players could easily dodge his attacks if they followed the rules. As for the players, they dealt as much damage as they did in the game. Although there wasn't a clear division of classes, the way they displayed their abilities was very similar to that of an online game. However, this boss wasn't a brainless NPC that was completely controlled by a computer program. Instead, it was Chun Guang who had a brain of flesh and blood and could scold people. He couldn't even remember how many times he had cursed in that instant, but it was of no use. What was even more shameful was that in the players' hearts, this gigantic blood pigeon was the final boss. From the very beginning, everyone had treated him as an almost invincible existence, and they had used all their might to bombard him. Unfortunately, the real boss had suddenly changed into a completely unfamiliar body, and now he felt extremely uncomfortable. Of course, the body of a human was completely different from that of a bird. Chun Guang found it awkward to use the various invincible martial arts that he was familiar with. Furthermore, the swamp that Withany had conjured was quite disgusting. Although it did not seem to cause him any harm, it could trap his claws and render him unable to move. If he was still in human form, Chun Guang would probably be able to fly out with a light body technique. But now, he was like a bloated pigeon. What was even more irritating was that his feet were completely soft, and there was not even a place for him to stand on. Apart from that, a powerful suction force came from beneath his feet, dragging him down. The attacks of the mortal players from afar were like a thunderstorm, never stopping for a moment. Chun Guang's feet were trapped, so he could only flap his wings to block the colorful attacks coming from all directions. Fortunately, even though it was not convenient for him to use the unique skills of the human race, the blood pigeon did have some special abilities. Even a simple flap of its wings could create a bloody whirlwind with a strong smell of blood. It could filter out most of the less powerful attacks in advance. Even the particle cannons from the Apocalypse tank were weakened when they passed through the Crimson Whirlwinds. The more substantial damage, like the cannonballs and bullets, were able to penetrate the whirlwinds and hit the huge body of the blood pigeon. Though sparks flew, they didn't cause any substantial damage to Chun Guang. The real threat was the mana arrows shot by the elven archers. After Peasant used time acceleration on the arrows, the powerful mana arrows became even more mysterious and difficult to capture. They flew at a frightening speed. It was as if the distance between them didn't exist. Thereafter, that delicate lady was ruthless, and her arrows were all aimed at Chun Guang's vitals. They were aimed at his eyebrows, his eyes, and his neck. Chun Guang looked at the aggressive mana arrows and didn't dare to hit them. The attacks of the gods were also troubling him. Yu Ting's lightning bolts bombarded his body as though they weren't charging electricity. The rest of the gods threw fireballs, ice cubes, and even fruits. Of course, there were also a bunch of demons that bared their fangs and brandished their claws, shooting various unknown energies. Coincidentally, no one or the god race was interested in taking another step forward. Even those whose awakened abilities didn't allow for long-range attacks chose to spend their last bit of reward points to purchase consumables with long-range attacks from the merchant shop. The Tang Sex, Sky, Blasting Thunder, Thunderbolt, and Zhuge repeating crossbows were used. Some crazy galactic enthusiasts even took out their laser guns and aimed them at Chen Guang. By Yubi. Chen Guang had seen these items in his merchant shop. He even saw the legendary Force Field Shield, which was sold for 100,000 reward points. If he could exchange for it, it would be much easier. It was a pity that he could only dream about it. Yu Ting's lightning bolt struck his head again. Chen Guang was anxious. He couldn't let this continue. Otherwise, he would be killed by the combined attacks of the two factions. This was because he found that after he transformed into a blood pigeon, the invincible talent of the earth-paced exploder had disappeared inexplicably. He wasn't sure if his blood pigeon avatar would be able to revert back to its original form when it was killed. It would be great if he could revert back to his original form, but if he were to die tragically in the boss state, it would be too miserable. He didn't dare to take the risk. At this moment, he suddenly had an idea, and a rather strange memory came to his mind. It was a rather strange martial emperor's unique skill that he had learned in the realm of true martial. It was called Condor Fighting Technique. It came from a non-human martial emperor called the Condor Hero. At that time, Chen Guang complained that this character must have been derived from Elder Jin's The Condor Heroes by the Heavenly Holy Grail. There was nothing wrong with this, but it was very difficult for him to learn Brother Condor's moves in human form. He had put in a lot of effort and spent almost 5 times the time of learning other ultimate skills before he managed to master this bird-type martial emperor's ultimate skill. Unfortunately, he had never used it since then. Now was the time. Sure enough, as soon as he tried to circulate the inner strength in his body, the originally very uncomfortable and blocked meridians suddenly became accessible in all directions, and he could do as he pleased. Chen Guang didn't rush to use the unique skill. Instead, he recalled the process of learning the Condor Fighting Technique in his mind. Although his mind was sealed in the realm of true martial, he still had hundreds of thousands of years' worth of memories. Even if they were solidified in his mind, he had to recall them slowly like a computer reading data. As he recalled, he continued to resist the player's attacks. Finally, after about 10 minutes, he had completely recalled the entire Condor Fighting Technique in his mind. In order to achieve a foolproof effect, he even tried to hypnotize himself. To be precise, he used world-class acting skills. He instilled an extremely strong idea into his mind. Next, the old man was going to act as a bird. It only took about 2 seconds for him to fully immerse himself in the role. Immediately, the players who had been happily attacking him seemed to have sensed the sudden change in his aura, and they all sensed it. Is this bastard on steroids? Why do I feel that something is wrong? The soldier carrying the big sniper had already walked out of his apocalypse tank. His treasure had run out of energy, but their firepower didn't weaken, including the old man. At this time, all of them were wearing individual combat armor, about 3 meters tall. Each of them looked like miniature Gundams. These Gundams each carried a new type of big sniper, which was quite powerful and caused a lot of trouble for Chen Guang. On the other side, the fat household appliance also poked his head out of his super-large electric crane and said loudly, "The pigeon's eyes have changed. It's glowing red." The genius high school student sitting next to the fat household appliance frowned. At first, he didn't say a word, but then he suddenly shouted, "Hurry up and leave." "What? I told you to hurry up and leave. Jump down from here. We can't stay here anymore." The fat household appliance didn't know what was going on. He subconsciously wanted to refuse the genius high school student's suggestion. In order to make this large crane, he had almost exhausted all of his energy. Now, every time he used it to throw the super-large sealed freezer at the pigeon, he had to burn a lot of reward points. This crane was his baby, the ultimate product that he could summon with his third awakening ability. How could he give it up just like that? But the genius high school student didn't give him a chance to think. Without saying a word, he grabbed his collar, opened the door, and jumped out of the control tower that was more than 30 meters tall. "Why is this happening?" The fat household appliance shouted in midair. "No reason. We're going to die if we don't leave." The genius high school student answered him concisely. On the other side, the shield warrior Azanoth shouted to the beast tamer hunter, "Hurry up and let your gorilla use rapid charge on the pigeon." The beast tamer executed the order without thinking. The gorilla that had been standing beside him roared, then charged forward like a cannonball. It even slid across the swamp, then raised its arms and slammed them down at the swamp in front of the blood pigeon. When the gorilla swung its arms, bolts of lightning appeared on its fists. It was very similar to the skill of the Hill King in the Warcraft series, Thunderclap. The boss is about to enter the second stage. The Fireball Magician knew what was good for him, as expected of an experienced online player. The Protoss players also noticed the changes in the boss, but unlike the ordinary players, they were more confident. Yu Ting even secretly used God's language to communicate with the others. "Fight to the death. This is a good chance to snatch the quest completion points." Chen Guang's blood-red eyes suddenly lit up. At this moment, his mind was in a half-human, half-bird state. He muttered something, but actually, he was complaining about Yu Ting's wishful thinking. "You're all corpses, and you still want to snatch the quest completion points from me?" In the blink of an eye, the blood pigeon, which had a third of its body sunk into the swamp, suddenly spread its wings, but it didn't flap downwards. The next moment, the long blood-red feathers on its wings stood up. "It's going to use its ultimate skill," the genius high school student shouted. The fat electrical appliance worker didn't have time to think. He raised his hand and summoned a large pile of old electrical appliances, piling them in front of the two of them as cover. A moment later, a red light suddenly appeared behind the cover in front of the two of them, like the sun rising from the east. Under the horrified gazes of Yu Ting and the other Protoss players, the tens of thousands of feathers on the blood pigeon suddenly transformed into countless javelins that shot out from its wings. These long feather javelins were so densely packed that the Protoss players closest to it couldn't avoid them. That wasn't the end of it. Every feather exploded halfway through its flight, turning into even more feathers that rained down on the entire Colosseum. Chen Guang's ultimate skill from the Condor art of fighting was called Thousand Feather Slash. The situation immediately reversed, and all the players were in danger. The first to die on the spot was the gorilla in front of him that had tried to stun him. Sorry, but as a boss, the old man was completely immune to stun-type control skills. The gorilla was first turned into a sieve, then it fell to the ground. A tombstone even appeared on the ground. Wethany, who was a little further away, saw that the situation wasn't looking good. She immediately retreated into the swamp beneath her. She managed to completely hide in the ground before the rain of needles descended, but there were still many feathers chasing after her. She didn't know if she could survive that. The other Terran players further away were also in chaos. The fat electrical appliance worker's beloved tower crane was instantly destroyed by the rain of needles. The old man and his companions conjured a huge metal shield in their hands. They formed a shield formation to protect themselves before the rain of needles descended. The card magician and his companions were in a worse state. The inferior force field shield that they purchased didn't last more than 5 seconds before it shattered. They had to use all their means to protect themselves. They could be considered lucky in Chen Guang's benevolence. The number of feathers that fell to their side wasn't much. As long as they're not so selfish and willing to spend the reward points in their pockets, or the valuable high-priced life-saving props that they have exchanged before, they can barely survive. Peasant and Elf Archer had it much easier. Peasant used his mutated time ability to form a semicircular shield in front of them. The Archers, on the other hand, switched to explosive fire magic arrows, shooting at the feathers that had been slowed down in the time shield, burning them to ashes before they could even land. The ones who suffered the most were the weaker, ordinary Protoss players who were relatively close to the blood pigeons. After the chaos, there was a moment of silence in the Colosseum. Peasant and the Elf Archer dodged the burning feathers that fell from the sky. They looked forward and were shocked. The previously lively Protoss players were now sprawled on the ground. 3 or 4 of them were completely dead, while 7 or 8 were struggling with great difficulty. As for Yu Ting, his face was covered in dirt as he ran around. Every time he passed by a Protoss player, he would exchange for an expensive healing pill and stuff it into their mouths, regardless of whether they were dead or alive. Wethany crawled out of the swamp, her face covered in blood. Her body was riddled with wounds, and she looked like she had been ravaged. Seeing this, Yu Ting hurriedly returned and stuffed the healing medicine into her mouth. However, when she touched her body, her arm fell to the ground first. "Lord Yu Ting, I'm going to die," Vesany said in despair. Yu Ting frowned. "What are you talking about? It's only the loss of a projection. I won't let you die so easily." Yu Ting did not particularly care about the lives of the other Celestial players, but in the Celestial realm, Wethany was his vanguard general. Yu Ting did not want to lose his right-hand man so early on in this game quest that made him feel powerless. On the other side, the Protoss players who could still move suddenly retreated a few steps. Yu Ting turned around and saw the blood pigeon, whose wings were now bare, slowly walk out of the swamp pit that had solidified again. Behind the blood pigeon was a bloody aura. Chapter 1196. Even though the gamers were of different races, they could feel the anger of the pigeon. They didn't know if it was a herbivorous magical beast or a carnivorous magical beast, but they felt that the pigeon wanted to eat humans. The earth-shattering blood chi flickered with a dark red radiance and soared into the sky. It was as if it was going to completely envelop the blue sky. It had to be said that the spectators and stands of the Colosseum had been made into mosaics. It was quite crude, but the sky looked quite exquisite. It didn't look beautiful. Instead, it accentuated the terrifying smell of blood coming from the blood pigeon. The dignified divine King Yu Ting was stared at by the crimson eyes of the blood pigeon, but he didn't have the majesty he had in the godly realm. He felt his hair stand on end and his heart tremble involuntarily. This feeling was as oppressive as when he faced the majesty of the divine king in the godly realm. It might even be stronger. It was so strong that he couldn't resist it. Everyone retreat. The human gamers weren't righteous enough to help the gods. Peasant was the first to react. He shouted and retreated with the elf archer and the other 2 girls without looking back. The other gamers reacted quickly. The fat household appliance gamer conjured an electric scooter for the genius high school student to sit with him. With a whoosh, the scooter dashed to the edge of the Colosseum. The genius high school student couldn't help but complain. An electric scooter is considered a household appliance? Of course, it's a 220-volt charger. Why can't it be considered a household appliance? That's F**king reasonable. I'm convinced. Naturally, Chen Guang, who had transformed into a bird, could hear the conversation between the 2 of them. He nearly laughed out loud and lost his cultivation. Gosh, the 2 of them are destroying my killing intent. On the other side, the old man and the others in the Gundam armor also quickly threw away the steel shields that were riddled with holes from the needles and feathers. They turned around and crawled to the ground. Then, for wheels fell off their shoulders and they turned into motorcycles. Their motors roared as they charged forward to escape. Their movements were quite swift and fierce. As for the card magicians group, after being severely injured, 2 of them died on the spot. The other 3, including the magician, gritted their teeth and crawled to escape in panic. The 3 Warcraft players were slower. Although they did not suffer too much damage under the cover of Azeroth's shield and the magician's dragon breath, the beast tamer was traumatized by the loss of his beloved pet. If not for his 2 companions holding him back, he would have charged forward without a care in the world. However, they managed to react in time, summoning their own mounts and running away. As soon as the mounts of these 3 fellows appeared, Chen Guang almost failed again. Damn it, you guys are veterans of the T7 set. Why don't you guys exchange for some reliable mounts? 3 chocobos popped out from the crotch of the 3 men, squawked, and scampered off. The scene was extremely comical and out of control. The human players were further away, so they were not heavily injured. They were able to escape quickly, but the Protoss were not so lucky. More than half of the Protoss were heavily injured, and their fates were unknown. Even though Yu Ting had fed the medicine, they would not recover in a short period of time. Yu Ting had not even finished feeding everyone their medicine. At that moment, most of his attention was on the dying Vesni in his arms. Even gods could be selfish. Yu Ting's choice was understandable. The blood pigeons behind him were getting more and more intimidating, and they were already charging towards him. Yu Ting had no time to hesitate. He gritted his teeth and made a decision. He could no longer care about the other Protoss. He carried Vesni's broken body and flew away, fleeing into the distance. The blood pigeon that Chun Guang had transformed into let out a squawk and gave chase. As a pigeon, it could fly under normal circumstances. However, its wings were bare, so it could not fly even if it wanted to. However, it wasn't slow at all. Rather than calling it a pigeon, its short legs swished as it ran, as if it had eaten stride. It was as fast as a bolt of red lightning, chasing after Yu Ting and Wethany. Chun Guang, who had completely hypnotized himself into a blood pigeon, had both the intelligence of a human and the battle instincts of a phantom beast. Among all the players, Vesni's attack power was almost non-existent. However, her swamp special skill could cause the most trouble for Chun Guang. Kill the biggest threat first. This was the simplest battle philosophy of a high-level phantom beast, the blood pigeon. So, without hesitation, he chose to chase after Yu Ting and Vesni. As for the other players, he could deal with them later. However, Yu Ting was not to be trifled with. Now that he had control over lightning, he could run as fast as lightning. He held Vesni in one hand and held a spear in the other. Plasma sprouted from the bottom of the spear, and the plasma surged into the shape of a flying carpet, which he stepped on. While running, Yu Ting did not care about the cost. He bought healing items and stuffed them into Vesni's mouth, or sprayed her with a spray. Chun Guang chased after Yu Ting for a while, but not only was he unable to catch up to Yu Ting, even Vesni was slowly coming back to life. Her severed arm had regrown white bones, and with these bones as a foundation, flesh and blood were slowly growing back. The countless holes on her body were also healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing that Yu Ting had even put Wethany down, the annoying Lolita goddess was standing on the plasma carpet beneath Yu Ting. She even turned around and made a face at Chun Guang. Chun Guang decided not to chase after her. He immediately turned around and headed for the center of the Colosseum. There were still many Celestials lying there. Some of the Celestials had already crawled up and fled, but there were still some who were struggling to save themselves and had not yet recovered. As Chun Guang ran, he used the innate ability of the blood pigeon, a phantom boss. Although its regenerative ability was far inferior to that of the Earth Marmalade Exploder, it was easy for it to regrow its feathers. As he deliberately activated his talent, his wings, which were so bald that they could be roasted and eaten, first surged with red blood. As the light flickered, the red blood quickly covered his entire wing, and in the blink of an eye, it turned back into feathers. This time, the blood pigeon that Chun Guang had transformed into finally learned how to fly. It flapped its wings and soared into the sky. A strong gust of wind accompanied the blood pigeon's flight, and it brought pain to those who saw it. Just the wind caused by the flapping of its wings could cause damage. After Chun Guang had completely adapted to its body, the blood pigeon's strength was evident. Yu Ting, who was running away, saw that the situation was not good. He quickly turned around and shouted, "Run!" 2 or 3 of the Celestials on the ground struggled to get up when they heard this, and ran forward regardless of the consequences. Another 3 or 5 Celestials even struggled to save their companions, but most of the Celestials were still lying on the ground. They were either on the verge of death or had no strength to get up. After a short period of chaos, the blood pigeon that Chun Guang had transformed and had already flown above them. Then, the blood pigeon opened its beak, and like a machine gun, it spat out thumb-sized chunks of chi. Those who didn't know what was going on would think that it was science fiction, and Chun Guang himself felt very awkward. No one would believe it, But this move was also a unique skill in the condor fighting technique called spitting grape seeds. That's right, this was the name. It was quite simple and crude. What he was spitting out now was a sharp cone of chi called grape seeds. If Chun Guang were to name it himself, he would probably rename it Birdbeak Gatling Gun. Obviously, it was more fitting. As he released this ultimate move, the chunks of chi were like machine guns firing at the ground, and the Celestials on the ground were immediately hit hard. Those who could still move either tried to dodge or use the items they had exchanged from the shop to protect themselves, but it was of little use. After a round of intensive shooting, the blood pigeon glided back to the ground, leaving behind only a piece of farmland that looked like it had been plowed by 8 oxen repeatedly. After Yuting put down Weathany, he rushed to the spot, and his face turned ashen when he saw the tragic scene. Previously, several Protoss had already died in battle. After such a torment, there were less than 10 Protoss who survived. The blood pigeon was not in a hurry to launch its next attack. Instead, it turned around and opened its beak again. Yuting thought that it was going to spit something again, and was shocked. He was about to turn around and run. But in the end, the blood pigeon did not spit anything. Instead, it took a deep breath in his direction. About 100 meters in front of Yuting, there seemed to be a black hole in the blood pigeon's beak. The strong suction made people feel like they were in the center of a tornado. Seeing that the situation was not good, Yuting quickly dodged to the side. In the process, he quickly picked up the remaining Celestials on the ground and threw them far away. As for those who were already dead, he had no time to care about them. But he did not know that Chun Guang's real target was not the living Celestials, but those who were already dead. Just now, he had planned to spit grape seeds again and plow the ground again, but suddenly he faintly smelled a scent from the dead Celestials that made his blood boil. It felt like a smoker who had failed to quit smoking and smelled smoke after 3 days, or like an old drunkard who suddenly had a large glass of pure Maotai wine in front of him. It was quite addictive. Therefore, he used a move from the condor fighting technique called swallowing mountains and rivers. As the name suggested, the key to swallowing mountains and rivers was to use internal energy as a driving force, using the well-developed lungs of birds as an air pump to crazily absorb the air from the outside world into one's body. Back then, Brother Condor had used this move to deal with the siege of nearly 1,000 martial artists. After using it, almost all the energy in the bodies of nearly 1,000 martial artists was sucked dry in a short period of time, causing them to completely lose the ability to resist. Right now, Chun Guang wanted to use this move to try and absorb the divine power released by the Protoss who were already dead and in the process of disintegrating into energy form. Of course, there was a side effect that was not very elegant. According to the law of conservation of matter, where there was an input, there must be an output. As for the method and place of the output, this was basically no different from when he was in his human form. Other than the mouth and nose, there was only one place on an animal's body that could still exhale. As a result, colorful smoke rose from nearly 10 places on the rapidly recovering Colosseum. Accompanied by the blood pigeons swallowing mountains and rivers, the smoke flew into its mouth. Under Yuting's extremely pained gaze, the divine power released by the Celestials was all sucked into the blood pigeon's mouth. However, it was not absorbed by him. Instead, it turned into colorful light that rushed out from the back of the blood pigeon and completely integrated into the slaughtering world. Yuting could not help but feel sad. The dignified and respected gods in the endless god realm had actually suffered such a great humiliation in this stupid mission. Not only did they die, they actually had to be eaten by this magical beast and then burst out from the back. What is your intention in doing this? If it was not for the fact that the other party could only croak, Yuting really wanted to scold it. In fact, even Chun Guang himself did not know what the point of doing this was. He subconsciously felt that filtering the Celestial's power out of his body would definitely be beneficial. However, when he carefully examined it, he felt that the benefits were completely undetectable. It was somewhat similar to the situation when they encountered the giant mosquito formation. The only difference was that in the giant mosquito formation, the giant mosquito first changed the nature of the Celestial's power. Then he did the filtering. Now he had become the mission boss, and the whole process was a one-stop service. Forget it. Since he could not figure out, there was no need to continue dwelling on it. There was definitely no harm in doing this. Chen Guang turned his head and once again focused his attention on Yu Ting. At this time, the other surviving Celestials had mostly recovered and gathered behind Yu Ting. Facing the blood pigeon's eyes that seemed to want to devour someone, Yu Ting and the other Celestials slowly calmed down from their initial panic. Blindly running away would not change their fate. The power of this blood pigeon was just as the mission description said. It was so powerful that there was no room for carelessness. Both sides had only fought for 2 to 3 rounds, and half of the Celestials had perished. Everyone, do you really want to wait until all of us are dead before showing your true power? Do you think you can take advantage of our deaths? It won't be that easy, right? Yu Ting said loudly without turning his head as he stared at the blood pigeon with all his attention. Everyone knew that he was talking to the mortal gamers. The mortal gamers looked at each other before focusing their gazes on the old geezer. At this critical moment, they believed that the older the ginger was, the spicier it was. They would let the older gamers make the decisions. The old geezer hesitated for a while before gritting his teeth and saying, "Let's not hide our abilities. If the Celestials are all dead, we won't have a good time." Chen Guang was anxious. He had not made up his mind to kill the old geezer and his companions, especially Peasant. Now that he had created a situation where he could wipe out the Celestials, how could he allow the mortals to interfere? He did not attack the Celestials immediately. Instead, he flapped his wings and flew backward. Then, he lifted his claws. He began to write on the ground. Human friends, don't panic. Though I'm a blood pigeon, I'm a peaceful dove. I'm a peace-loving dove. The Celestials came from another dimension and aren't from this universe. They are the natural enemies of us, so we have to kill them. You and I are of the same race, so we can coexist peacefully. Chen Guang wrote the words on the ground swiftly and flew to the side. He changed his mind. He did not intend to tell the mortals that he was Noon. If he had to kill the human gamers, he had no choice. The hunter summoned his magic warhawk and flew over. Then he used a shared magical vision to read the words on the ground clearly and read them out loud. Gosh, the perverted blood pigeon is trying to sway us. And it's intelligent. And it's written in Chinese. And it's written beautifully. It's so cunning. After the beast tamer finished reading, he couldn't help but start complaining. Chen Guang, who was flying in the air, nearly plummeted to the ground. I'm really seeing a ghost. There's something wrong with good writing? He had boasted that he was a peaceful dove. Why didn't they believe him? Chapter 1197. The result of the fruitless communication was that when there were less than 10 Protoss players left, the two camps finally joined forces. This was the situation that Chen Guang had been trying to create. He did not expect that it would finally happen. However, the one they were going to deal with was him. This was an awkward feeling. Chen Guang, who had turned into a blood pigeon, no longer wanted to complain about himself. Right now, he only wanted to destroy the Protoss as soon as possible. As for the human players, he would be merciful and allow them to be willful one more time. There was no other way. The old man was just that kind and generous. After filtering the divine power of the dead Protoss players, he immediately flapped his wings and flew into the sky, causing all the attacks from the human players to miss. At the same time, he put himself in an invincible position. Looking at the many opponents on the ground, Chen Guang felt a sense of accomplishment as a boss for the first time. Have you ever seen something like this before? The old man can fly. Are you afraid? While he was gloating, Yu Ting, who was on the ground, also leaped into the air. Chen Guang immediately remembered that Yu Ting could also transform into lightning and fly into the air. From the looks of it, Yu Ting was no longer a coward and wanted to fight him head-on. Chen Guang narrowed his pigeon eyes and looked down at Yu Ting, trying to guess his motives and what he was relying on. It was obvious that Yu Ting was no match for him. Where did he get the courage to fly into the air and attack him? He took a closer look. Sure enough, the remaining Protoss players, who were scattered in various corners of the Colosseum, had unknowingly formed a formation on the ground. Faint but eerie blue threads were connected to these Protoss players. Not only that, but as time passed, these originally single threads gradually grew more and more branches. These branches were connected together. In addition, there were nearly 10 Protoss at the center of the array. Gradually, the huge Colosseum was filled with an enchanting yet beautiful magic array. I've stalled him. Mortal friends, I have just used up all my reward points to purchase this magic array. This tool is called No Pigeons Under the Heavens. It can gather the power of everyone standing in a magic array. Please take the initiative to stand in the center of the hexagram. Only by gathering everyone's power will we be able to control it. Yu Ting, who was originally on the ground, roared. Lightning surged from his body once more, and he soared into the sky, charging towards Chengguang. Chengguang heard his words clearly and found it funny. He thought that he was really a fantasy beast and couldn't understand human language. Do you think I'll let you comfortably store your ultimate move? Do you take me for a fool? Also, do you think those human players will fall for your tricks? God knows what tricks you have up your sleeves. Perhaps the moment ordinary players step into this formation, they will be firmly controlled by you and become nutrients for your doomless formation. How could the old man's players be so stupid? Impossible. Holy sh*t, you guys are so honest that you didn't even bother to check and just stepped in like that? Since when did you guys become so simple and honest? Under Chengguang's dumbfounded gaze, nearly 20 human players stepped into the eye of the magic array without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, the magic array that only covered the celestial players suddenly became even more dazzling. The mysterious patterns on the magic array continued to grow like spring buds. In less than 2 seconds, the colossal Bestial Battle Arena was completely occupied by Yu Ting's No Pigeons Under the Heavens magic array. As for Chengguang, who was flying in the air, he had originally planned to fly a little higher and use the ultimate move of condor fighting called 10,000 Eagles Greeting. He wanted to give Yu Ting and his unlucky magic array a vicious blow. Unexpectedly, as he was flying, he suddenly felt his wings tighten. A terrifying force came from below and fiercely pulled him down. He felt as if his wings were being grabbed by a giant. This force was so overbearing that he couldn't resist at all. Chengguang's upward momentum immediately came to a halt. He turned around and fell headfirst to the ground. The name of this magic array was very strange, but it was so powerful that it made people's hair stand on end. As he fell, he tried to control his body with all his might, but it was all in vain. He couldn't move at all. As for Yu Ting, he continued to fly in his direction. Behind him, lightning flashed and thunder roared. It looked like a fireworks display. He can't move. Yu Ting seemed to be talking to himself, but it also seemed like he was telling someone else. His face lit up with a relieved smile. Chengguang finally understood. In fact, this guy didn't know what the special effect of the No Doomless formation was. He just wanted to give it a try. It was just that he was unlucky enough to be the one to succeed. Forget it. I'll peck you to death. Although he couldn't move his wings, Chengguang could still turn his head slightly. He extended his neck and aimed his beak at Yu Ting, who was rushing up from below. Unfortunately, Yu Ting wasn't stupid. Just as the two were about to make contact, he nimbly dodged Chengguang's kiss of death. He turned and followed the giant body of the blood pigeon as he fell. Then, as he descended, he stabbed the lightning spear in his hand at the blood pigeon's huge back. Now that he had used up all his reward points, the only thing he could rely on was his divine power. Sparks flew from the blood pigeon's back. Its crimson feathers were burnt black for a moment, then returned to normal the next moment. Yu Ting couldn't help but curse inwardly. The magical beast in the last checkpoint was a little too powerful. He had already used all his strength, but he still couldn't break through its defense. As for the other players, they didn't stay idle either. Seeing that the giant creature was really controlled as Yu Ting said, They all used their trump cards and bombarded the stomach of the blood pigeon. With a loud bang, the blood pigeon's huge body fell to the ground, and then there was no sign of life. Of course, Qingguang wouldn't die so easily. In fact, while falling from the sky, he seemed to have suffered serious injuries, but in fact, they were only superficial wounds. He didn't move now because he was trying to figure out how to use the unlucky no doomless formation. Without batting an eyelid, he tried to kick his legs. The feeling of being completely restrained was gone. He could move freely again. As he had guessed, the no doomless formation was actually a magic formation that restricted the flight of birds. Once it landed on the ground, it would lose its effect. Dead. On the ground, a Protoss looked at Yu Ting and asked carefully. Yu Ting squinted and waved his hand. Everyone stay where you are. Otherwise, the formation's effect will be weakened. I'll go take a look. The effect of the no doomless formation was better than expected. Of course, the players wouldn't give up so easily. Moreover, since Yu Ting had taken the initiative to test the waters, the others were more than happy to see him. If the pigeon was faking it, they wouldn't be the ones to suffer. Yu Ting was on high alert. He approached the blood pigeon step by step. On the other side, Wethany once again summoned a swamp, spreading it along the ground in an attempt to suck the body of the blood pigeon into the swamp. Yu Ting moved closer, raised his lightning spear, and stabbed it at the blood pigeon's head. With a swish, the spear cut through the blood pigeon's feathers. Although it didn't pierce through, it finally left a wound on its head. Yu Ting's eyebrows twitched slightly. It seemed that the formation he had exchanged for was really effective. He just didn't know if this kind of binding contribution could be counted into the final kill contribution. Yu Ting gradually became selfish. Like Qingguang, he believed that there must be a reason why the massacre mission divided the gamers into the Mortals and Protoss factions. In addition, throughout the entire process of carrying out the mission, it seemed that Slaughter World had always emphasized one point, and that was either the damage contribution or the number of people killed. The distribution of rewards seemed to be specific to each gamer, but Yu Ting felt that there was another meaning. Yu Ting's lips trembled slightly, and the mana formation on the ground started to change slightly. The blue light on the magic vein patterns grew brighter and brighter, and gradually, everyone couldn't see the scene in front of them clearly. Yu Ting said loudly, "Don't panic. I'm strengthening the control of the mana formation. Once it's under control, it'll be ours to slaughter. Don't be stingy with your reward points. Completing the mission and surviving is more important than anything else." Are we really that generous? In a human camp, the female elf archer asked Peasant, who was standing not far from her. Peasant looked at the motionless blood pigeon in the distance and frowned. She thought for a while and said, "Besides Emperor Yu Ting, none of us can afford the mana formation. Since we have a chance to kill this boss, we should work together with them." The female elf archer nodded and said, "Indeed." Mr. Dang said that to overcome this crisis, we have to work together with the annoying Protoss. But don't be too generous. We have to have a backup plan. All right, don't worry, Sister Peasant. I understand. Peasant had the same thought, and the others had similar thoughts. Though they didn't know what happened to Dang Dang. Even if he was gone, they wouldn't forget his instructions. The situation between the Protoss and the humans had reversed. The humans were getting stronger, while there were less than 10 Protoss left. Everyone didn't fear the Protoss, so they didn't oppose working with them. It was like a rabbit being unwilling to work with a jackal. If the jackal became a piglet of the same size as the rabbit, there would be room for negotiation. Everyone had seen the world without Pigeon's formation in the reward point shop. The price was a few 100,000 points. Yu Ting wasn't bragging. He had spent all his reward points. Qingguang, who was pretending to be dead on the ground, was in awe. He felt sorry for Yu Ting's misfortune and angry at Yu Ting's incompetence. Previously, when he wanted to ask these people to help save the divine race, they all resisted and objected in various ways. Yu Ting had selfish motives, but they let go of their grudges and worked with him. Should I really treat them as my own kind? Qingguang asked himself. He wasn't in a hurry to act, as he knew Yu Ting's plan. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, The halo around his body became more and more intense, as if it had really formed a large net to trap him. As for the players of the two factions, they couldn't see anything. The strong light was even worse than the white fog. The ordinary players started to panic, and Yu Ting once again reassured them. About Blood Pigeon under control. I'll be able to focus the mana formation on him soon. The others couldn't see clearly, but Chun Guang wasn't in human form. He had transformed into a big boss bird. His eyes were completely different from a human's. Chun Guang narrowed his eyes. He watched as Yu Ting moved the Protoss closer to him with the mana formation. He could see through Blood Pigeon's intentions. First of all, this guy thought he was being controlled. Second, he planned to send all the Protoss over to steal the old man's head. Good. Without batting an eyelid, he began to inhale violently. Fortunately, he was lying on the ground with his back facing up. Under the cover of the strong light, even Yu Ting, who could see, didn't notice that Blood Pigeon's chest was expanding. Finally, about 3 minutes later, all the Protoss were silently teleported to a place not far from Shuang. Chun Guang could even hear Yu Ting whispering instructions to the others in God's language. They were formulating a battle plan to succeed in one fell swoop. At the same time, Vesni's swamp once again covered his body. This time, more than half of it was buried in the swamp. Holding his breath, Chun Guang felt as if the aura in his chest was on the verge of exploding. He was both the prey and the hunter. Chapter 1198. Yu Ting led the celestial race to probe carefully. Chun Guang was also trying to suppress his urge. A little closer, a little closer. He squinted his eyes and allowed the wounds that Yu Ting had left on his body to gush out blood. He could have used the Blood Pigeon's talent to convert the blood that gushed out of the wounds into energy and reabsorbed it into his own body, but he did not do so. As a black-bellied young man of the new era, he wasn't one of those idiotic bosses in the game who only knew how to deal with players in a fixed way. He was strong, cunning, and good at acting. If the person controlling the world without Pigeon's formation was not Yu Ting, but another human player, they would not have fallen for it so easily. After all, humans were more careful in their actions, and they were also more knowledgeable about such things. However, Yu Ting did not think too much about it. He believed in his own divine power and the game's setting that was forced upon him. In his mind, this was a quest space created by the origin will of the endless realm of gods. This quest space must be perfect and flawless. When Yu Ting chose to purchase the magic circle, he had carefully read the description of the magic circle. It was clearly written that the magic circle could cause fatal damage to bird-type creatures and completely control them. Up until now, the effects of the magic circle had achieved its goal. Although it was expensive and consumed a lot of energy, as long as they could kill the Blood Pigeon, it was all worth it. As long as they could successfully complete this quest space, it would mean that their goal of leading the advance party into the game space had been achieved. Yu Ting turned to face the Blood Pigeon again and raised his hand. However, he immediately realized that no one could see his hand gesture, so he retracted it. Even as the controller of the magic circle, he could only see a faint shadow. However, he could sense that the entire magic circle's power was pressing down on the Blood Pigeon. Heavy breathing could be heard from the Blood Pigeon's direction. Yu Ting felt that the most powerful phantom beast was struggling with all its might. Everyone, pay attention to my instructions. Although this phantom beast is strong, the defense of its neck and the back of its head is relatively weak. When I give the order, everyone will attack together and attack the back of its head. We will definitely be able to deal a heavy blow. Yu Ting lowered his voice and spoke in a voice that only the Protoss could hear. Although we may have to bear a certain amount of risk, if we can deal a heavy blow to the Blood Pigeon, it will definitely give us an advantage in the mission settlement. However, don't be greedy. Just hit it once and then immediately retreat. Let this phantom beast find trouble with those mortals. Yu Ting felt that his plan was flawless. Even if he couldn't succeed in one fell swoop, he could at least deal a heavy blow to the blood pigeon. If the Protoss were to retreat immediately, the human race would have to stand in the front instead of the back. Facing the attack of the blood pigeons, they had no choice but to change their stance of not contributing. Unfortunately, in order to get his voice through, Yu Ting could switch channels, but he couldn't block messages. Every word he said was clearly heard by Chen Guang, who was pretending to be dead on the ground. Since this little scheme of his was within Chen Guang's calculations from the very beginning, it was destined to fail. The mortals, who were completely in the dark, were unwilling to follow Yu Ting's orders. However, the magic circle that Yu Ting had exchanged for had a miraculous effect. Even if they felt that something was amiss, the mortal players still held the intention to wait and see. If it was really as Yu Ting said, that they could completely control the blood pigeon until it died, that would be for the best. Even if there were any problems, Yu Ting should be the first to get into trouble. Aren't we being too passive? The fat household appliance worker asked softly into the walkie-talkie hanging around his neck. The genius high school student replied, "So what if we're being passive? Can you afford to buy a magic circle?" But this won't end here. This is the last boss. These Protoss have never played online games before, so they don't know that even the real big boss is not easy to deal with, let alone the final boss. According to my experience, this blood pigeon must have many forms. Don't forget, when it exploded its feathers, the Protoss suffered heavy losses. We didn't feel good either. Isn't this situation similar to before? The fat household appliance worker thought about it and nodded. It was exactly as the high school student had said. Just as the two of them were conversing, Yu Ting, who was in front of them, shouted. In the next instant, the azure light that had covered the entire beast-fighting coliseum quickly converged on Blood Pigeon, who was lying on the ground. Yu Ting activated the full power of the no-pigeon formation. The Blood Pigeon turned into a blue lump. It was as if it had been pressed to the ground, unable to move. Nearly 10 Protoss, who were prepared, shot into the sky at almost the same time. Perhaps they were using all of their divine power, or perhaps they were carrying expensive single-use items that they had just exchanged for. The power of these items might not be worth mentioning in front of their celestial bodies, but in this slaughtering world, they were definitely the strongest attacks they had seen so far. Just from the names of the items that they had exchanged for, they knew that they were not joking. Annihilation cannons, star destroyers, slaughter puppets. In short, the names of these items were extremely domineering. If they were in the celestial realm, the gods might have thought that these items were so childish that they were laughable. But now, they no longer looked down on them. 70% of their companions' projections had died. Perhaps they would be next. Although he was a noble Protoss in this mysterious mission space, other than having a slightly higher starting point at the very beginning, it seemed that his vitality was not much stronger than that of mortals. Therefore, they had to seize this hard-won opportunity and establish a real advantage for the advance party in the first test of this mysterious mission. With this thought in mind, all of the gods' attacks were aimed at the back of the blood pigeon's neck. On the other side, Yu Ting did not move. He only stared at the blood pigeon that was completely covered in blue light. Firstly, he really did not have any more reward points. Secondly, he had to control the magic formation. Finally, it was done. Seeing that everyone's attacks were aimed at the back of the blood pigeon's neck, Yu Ting thought to himself. At this moment, the huge body, glowing with blue light, suddenly raised its head. Yu Ting's pupils shrank. He opened his mouth, wanting to shout out loud. But it was too late. The gigantic blood pigeon displayed unimaginable agility. When it raised its neck, it spread its wings and flapped them on the ground. Even though it had hit the swamp that Vithany had conjured, the large area of contact still provided it with enough strength to land a hit. The next moment, the blood pigeon stood upright and aimed its beak at one of the Protoss in front of it. Seeing that the situation was not good, the gods wanted to turn around and retreat, but it was too late. The blood pigeon spat out a silent shockwave from its beak, instantly enveloping the Protoss in front of it. Looking from aside, Yu Ting could clearly see the distortion in space caused by the shockwave. Deep down, Chen Guang was also shocked. He did not expect the power of the blood pigeon's toad spit from the condor fighting art to be so shocking. "I'll kill you with a mouthful of salt soda." He still had enough air in his chest. Chun Guang decisively shook his head. And so, under Yu Ting's desperate gaze, the toad spit swung in a full circle, sweeping through the 7 or 8 Protoss that were flying high and low in the air. But they did not cry out and fly backwards. Instead, they suddenly stopped in the air. Seeing the blood pigeon turn its head to face him again, the blue light that had enveloped its body gradually dissipated. Yu Ting did not look back and turned to run, dragging Vesthini along with him. If not for the fact that he could not say it, Chun Guang really wanted to tell him, "Are you stupid? Do you think you're invincible just because you added a magic seal that works against birds? Can't I just stay in the air? What's the point? No one said that birds had to fly, right? Could the magic seal stop ostriches?" But Chun Guang was not at ease. After Yu Ting took Vesthini away, the swamp was quickly solidifying, but the fatal attacks from the gods all fell on the ground in front of him. Yes, it was the place where he had swung his head. On the other hand, the ordinary players, who were confused by the sudden turn of events, had no idea what was going on. The ordinary players looked at the gradually dissipating magic seal and wanted to ask Yu Ting, but Yu Ting did not have time to deal with them. At the same time, as the explosion in front of Chun Guang sounded like a nuclear bomb, the gods that had been frozen in the air after being hit by the toad spit suddenly turned into dust and scattered. Dead? They're all dead? The ordinary players were at a loss. The explosion in front of Chun Guang continued. He had no choice but to roll up his wings and protect himself. A strong explosion came from in front of him, and the blood pigeon's huge body was blown away. But before he could fly more than 2 meters, he fell to the ground, as if he had been swatted by a fly swatter. The blue light that had been gradually dispersing actually condensed on his body again. Chun Guang's wings, which had just regrown with great difficulty, were first blasted bare by the explosions before the gods' deaths. What was even more tragic was that he was smacked by the magic array's anti-flying effect, causing him to be in a daze. Chun Guang raised his head slightly, wanting to curse. "I didn't fly on my own. Is it my fault that I was blown away?" Just then, a figure appeared not far away from him like lightning. It was the card magician. He was holding a metal card that was half a meter long in his hand. It was a king card. Then his eyes flashed fiercely. He swung his body like a discus, and the big ghost in his hand spun and flew towards the blood pigeon's neck. This guy reacted quickly. He actually knew how to snatch the sword. Chun Guang raised his bare wings in front of his neck, a question the size of a fist in his head. To kill or not to kill? Chapter 1199. While he was thinking about this in his mind, the big ace had already sharply cut its wings. The card magician's seemingly inconspicuous move contained perhaps his strongest attack. Without the cover of feathers, the card cut a wound so deep that the bone could be seen. That wasn't the end of it. The metal ace didn't stay in his wings. Instead, it flew out and spun in the air for a while before exploding and turning into small poker cards that filled the sky. Then, they flew in a big circle and returned to the card magician's hand. The magician shuffled the thick stack of cards in his hand as he retreated. Then he clapped his hands, and the stack of cards turned into the big ghost that was half a meter long. At the same time, he shouted, "Everyone, don't just stand there. This big pigeon is seriously injured. Let's kill it while it's still weak." As he shouted, he threw the big ghost in his hand again. Chun Guang's heart ached. That's right, he felt heartache. "My heart is like the moon, but the moon shines on the ditch. I hit you hard." The old man was in such a good state that he could eat 3,000 kilograms of pigeon feed. "I'm too into it. I just can't bear to kill you. But you're forcing me to do this." He wanted to chase after Yu Ting and Wethany. But on the other side, many ordinary players were convinced by the card magician's bewitching words and surrounded him. No matter what, Chun Guang's appearance as the real blood pigeon was a little unsightly. The feathers on the front half of his body had almost all been burnt, and his standard pigeon skin was densely covered in countless wounds. coupled with the miserable state he had been in when he suddenly fell to the ground. Anyone would think that he was an arrow at the end of its flight. In addition, Yu-Ting's previous action of commanding the Protoss to steal the damage contribution points caused the ordinary players to misunderstand. They really thought that the blood pigeon was about to die. Although the sudden death of more than half of the Protoss shocked everyone. Wasn't this because of the blood pigeon's final struggle? In any case, they had to be enemies with it. Rather than waiting for it to catch its breath and defeat it one by one, they might as well kill it now. Therefore, after a short period of silence, the players suddenly went berserk. Dressed in miniature Gundam armor, the old man squad shone brightly as they put on their armor and charged toward Chen Guang's direction. While they were sprinting, two thick black tubes extended from their shoulders and shot at the blood pigeons in front of them. Countless light spots the size of ostrich eggs flew toward the blood pigeons. They did not plan to give Chen Guang any chance to breathe. The fatty and the middle school student hesitated for a moment and did not follow up immediately. This was the middle school student's idea. He had a feeling that things were not as simple as they seemed. The pigeon did not seem to be in a good situation, but its aura did not diminish much. Peasant and her two companions didn't move. They left the mana formation and gathered together. Why don't we go and help? If we can kill blood pigeon along the way, won't everything be over? The elven archer asked in confusion. Peasant shook his head and said, "No, let's observe the situation. I feel that the gaze of the magical beast is familiar." Peasant didn't want to tell the others his conjecture because it was too unbelievable. As the saying went, the eyes were the windows to the soul. A person's appearance and clothing could be disguised, but it was difficult to change one's gaze. The situation had changed drastically, so Peasant didn't think of a possibility. As time passed, especially when the blood pigeon's eyes flashed with anger and humiliation, Peasant recalled the Chinese characters that blood pigeon had written on the ground with its claws. Peasant suddenly felt that the pigeon's gaze was similar to Mr. Dang's, though they were of different races, and it was inconceivable she had an illusion. Peasant felt that the person who gave her the illusion was another person. She felt that the blood pigeon's gaze and behavior were similar to an outsider. When that person's figure appeared in her mind, she realized that Mr. Dang was similar to that person too. With that person as a bridge, Peasant slowly connected blood pigeon and Mr. Dang together. Using her analytical mind, Peasant overlapped Mr. Dang's face and gaze with the head of blood pigeon, who was about to retaliate. The more she thought, the more suspicious she felt, but she had no evidence. She was perplexed. If Mr. Dang was the final boss of the world of bloodshed, what would happen to them? He was almost invincible and had the intelligence of a human. He was an old gamer who had seen through the entire game system. What else could they do but wait for death? At a distance, Blood Pigeon sent the card magician's trump card flying. Then, he used his wings to protect himself from the cannon fire of the old geezer's team. Behind it, the magical bee skill trio finally pounced on it. The warrior activated Bloodlust, the fireball magician cast Pyroblast, and the Beastmaster summoned his Shadow Wolf. With a command, the Shadow Wolf transformed into a stream of light and charged forward. Chen Guang couldn't take it anymore. He understood that since they were on different sides, he would be cruel to himself if he was merciful to others. If he didn't make any changes now, he might really die here if he was worn out from exhaustion. Compared to normal gamers, he didn't have any reward points to use. All his actions had consumed his own energy. Now, compared to the beginning, his mobility had actually declined slightly. "So lad, I'm sorry." Chen Guang shook his head and used his claws to support himself on the ground. Then, he strode forward. The card magician was caught off guard. He wanted to escape, but it was too late. When he was above the card magician's head, Chen Guang kicked up. In the blink of an eye, the azure light that had dissipated long ago returned to his body, and he smashed down like a cannonball, slamming into the ground. Chen Guang expressed that his experiment was a success. Unfortunately, the no pigeon under heaven array still hadn't exhausted its energy. The principle behind it was also simple. He had to maintain a certain part of his body in contact with the ground, or it would trigger the flight restriction. This brought him a lot of inconvenience, but it also had its benefits. Propping himself up from the ground, Chun Guang shook his head again and ran to another person who was very close to him. Everyone retreat. The boss has entered a chaotic attack state. The electrical appliance fatty shouted with a loudspeaker. Chun Guang ignored him. In order to make himself more ruthless, Chun Guang completely hypnotized himself to forget his human identity. He really turned himself into a phantom boss in a killing mission. For a moment, he was full of murderous intent and pursued efficiency. He only wanted to reduce the enemy's life force as quickly as possible. He killed the shadow wolf in front of him with a casual claw. His second choice was the magical beast warrior closest to him. The magical beast warrior used a cover skill and dashed to his teammates at the speed of charge. But the blood pigeon suddenly opened its beak, and a sound wave came from behind, messing up the warrior's escape route. He couldn't control himself and turned back to the blood pigeon. Only when he was close to the blood pigeon did he barely regain control of his body and try to raise his shield. The blood pigeon lowered its head and pecked down like a chick pecking at rice. The giant beak rammed into the spiked rampart of Asenath. There was a loud noise. The beak flashed red, and the door-sized steel shield cracked. The magical beast warrior screamed, his eyes wide with anger. The beak pierced through his chest, and his body gradually turned into dust. Another player died. At that moment, Chun Guang did not notice that the god's divine power that he had filtered and then dispersed from his, but had quietly gathered together again. Yu Ting, who had escaped far away, had a fierce glint in his eyes. He made a difficult decision. In the depths of Yu Ting's mind, the unwilling cries of nearly 50 Protoss players rang out. Lord Yu Ting, no, no. Yu Ting, are you crazy? What are you doing? Yu Ting, I won't let you go when we return to the Divine Realm. It turned out that the seemingly dead Protoss still had their divine souls in this mission space, even though their projected bodies had collapsed. Once the mission was over, these divine souls would return to their real bodies. But now, Yu Ting was using the power given to him by the origin of the Divine Realm to control the scattered divine souls of the Protoss, and then gather all of their divine power together. His goal was simple. He would gather the divine power of the gods together and then detonate it. Under normal circumstances, Chun Guang would definitely be able to detect Yu Ting's sneaky trick. But right now, in order to kill the human players without any qualms, he had hypnotized himself a little too much. After pecking the warrior to death, Chun Guang pounced on the magician. The magician first used flash and teleported, but Chun Guang chased after him. The magician's flash skill was still on cooldown. Helplessly, he raised his hands high, and with his position as the center, his body was instantly frozen by a glowing layer of ice. This was the ice block that mages use to protect themselves in World of Warcraft. It could temporarily enter a state of invincibility. But this was meaningless. Facing this ice block, Chun Guang first took a deep breath and then continued to breathe at it. Once the ice block skill's duration was up, it would naturally dissipate, and the magician would immediately turn into dust. Chun Guang's eyes were bloodshot. He turned around and pounced on one of the Gundams from Ullman's team. This mini Gundams that had transformed into a motorcycle turned around and tried to run, but a long feather suddenly flew over and stuck its tire, nailing it to the ground. Chun Guang rushed over, and when he got close, the mini Gundam suddenly opened up, and a panic-looking brawny man jumped out of it. As he ran, another long feather flew out, but it hit the force field shield activated by the battle robe on the muscular man's body. The long feather shattered, but it didn't vanish. Instead, it transformed into crimson blood that coiled tightly around the force field shield. The blood pigeon screeched, lifted its leg, and stomped down viciously. The force field shield cracked. Death. This creature is going berserk, the fat electrical appliance specialist said in a panic. The Genius High School student's heart raced. This creature is too powerful. We're no match for it. Sister Peasant, we can't hesitate anymore. Otherwise, everyone will die. Peasant's companions urged anxiously. Peasant pursed her lips tightly. At this moment, only she could see the indignation and pain in the mythical beast's eyes. Peasant wasn't wrong. At this moment, Chen Guang had already completed his self-hypnosis. However, his true self was still awake and independent in the depths of his heart. He discovered that as he truly began to slaughter the human race, his standpoint and position in the depths of his heart were inevitably shifting. All along, no matter how high his status was, or how he had the power to decide the life and death of the commoners, he didn't change his attitude. At the very most, he only regarded himself as a powerful and wealthy mortal. But now, there was an uncontrollable feeling in his heart. Perhaps he was wrong from the start. He wasn't a creature of the same level as the humans. He was like a child who was fed by wolves and had to return to human society sooner or later. In the process of killing, he awakened the instincts of a high-level creature that viewed life as grass and mortals as ants. Would he become like Yu Ting and the other Protoss? What could he do? Stop killing and wait for death with his eyes closed? Accept the consequences of failing the mission with a ridiculous reason, and then be killed by the heavenly Holy Grail? So, the fundamental purpose of this world of slaughter is to let me completely break away from the state of mind of a mortal. Did he have to pay such a heavy price to upgrade the heavenly Holy Grail from the second level of One-Line Sky to the third level of Cloud Elephant Sky? Chen Guang couldn't help but recall bits and pieces of his memories. He remembered his parents' voices and smiles. He remembered his childhood friends and buddies from his hometown. He remembered his classmates who fought with him in junior high school. He remembered his best buddies in Gokyo University, his subordinates in Tianguan Group, the world that he was determined to change, and the women that he couldn't bear to part with. What should he do? He had never faced such a dilemma. Either he would die, or from now on, he would no longer be himself. As he watched his body pounce towards another miniature Gundam, he used his completely calm self to think that perhaps this was the true meaning of the slaughtering world. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.